Meeting number 51 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 10th, 2022, the committee is meeting on Bill C-19, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7, 2022, and other measures. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10th, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask, except for members who are at their place during proceedings. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. I request that members and witnesses mutually treat each other with respect and decorum. I would now like to welcome today's witnesses. So for our first panel from now 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., as an individual, we have Vas Bednar, who's the Executive Director, Master of Public Policy in Digital Society Program, McMaster University. And I believe Ms. Bednar will only be with us till 11:40 a.m. this morning. We have now from the Canadian Dental Association, Lynn Tompkins, who's the president, and also Aaron Burry, acting chief executive officer. From the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Matt Poirier, the director of trade policy, is with us. And now from the National Marine Manufacturers Association of Canada, we have Sarah Engel, who is the president. From the Philanthropic Foundations Canada, Jean-Marc Mangin, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Producteurs de Cidre du Québec, we have Marc-Antoine Lasnier, who's the President, and Catherine St. George, who's the Director General. And we have now our other witnesses, the Wine Growers of Canada, Dan Paskowski, who's the President and Chief Executive Officer, and Mr. Paskowski is in the room, members. We'll now begin with Ms. Bednar for her opening remarks for up to 5 minutes, please. Ms. Bednar.
Good morning. Thank you to the chair and to this committee for the opportunity to appear. We haven't quite met before. You've heard my name is Vas Bednar, and I'm the Executive Director of McMaster University's MPP in Digital Society program, where I'm also an adjunct professor of political science. I actively participate in Canada's policy ecosystem as an Action Canada Fellow, a Public Policy Forum Fellow, and a Senior Fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation, known as CIGI. In addition to my leadership role at McMaster, I'm one of the country's most vocal advocates for competition modernization. I've engaged Canadians on the merits and need for competition reform in modest but meaningful ways through opinion editorials in the Globe and Mail, the National Post, collaborative research published by McGill University and commissioned by ISED, various podcast interviews, and my newsletter, which has a funny name, Regs to Riches. And due to that general focus on competition in Canada and my own intellectual anchoring in digital policy issues, I'm going to focus my brief remarks on the amendments that pertain to the Competition Act. Now, as you know, that act was last updated modestly after the Compete to Win report, which was initiated in 2008. And 2008 is the same year that Apple's App Store launched. It's when Uber and Airbnb were founded, later Slack and Venmo, and so many more. So in many ways, that year is a hinge of sorts for the acceleration of the digital economy. Now, there are plenty of good reasons to support competition modernization beyond the passage of time. An Ipsos poll from earlier this year illuminated that most Canadians say we need more competition, as it's too easy for big business to take advantage of consumers. It's 88%. And as noted in President Biden's historic executive order on competition from last spring, economists find that as competition declines, productivity growth slows, business investment and innovation decline, and income, wealth, and racial inequality widen. Competition is a key catalyst of productivity. It attracts investment, stimulates the creation of high-skilled jobs, and it fuels exports of Canadian products, services, and ideas. I recently appeared before your colleagues at Indu to discuss these proposed changes to the Competition Act in greater detail. And during that meeting, I expressed support for the amendments because they clearly serve the public interest at a time when Canadians are under intense economic pressure. They will improve the enforcement of the current act. They were clearly foreshadowed in a February press release from the minister. They're aligned with analysis from the Competition Bureau, and they've been discussed at length in the public domain. I also acknowledge that while the Budget Implementation Act is an imperfect democratic tool, policy windows of opportunity are scarce and must be seized. Another reason for my general support is that these proposed amendments, they start to bring Canada in line with best practices in peer jurisdictions. It also sends a good signal that we're moving, however slowly, in the right direction, especially on making references to artifacts of the digital economy. So I want to be clear here. In general, we're playing catch up in Canada, except on wage fixing, where no one jurisdiction is really ahead or has figured out the optimal implementation of that policy goal. Going forward, you should or could strike a panel of Canadian academics that focuses on the competition issues as your digital policy task force. I'd like to encourage this committee to consider the merits of an all-of-government approach to digital regulation that can complement competition reform efforts and help us achieve a truly interoperable policy environment. This is something I've written about. These changes are a down payment on competition reform in Canada, modernization that's long overdue. They're not perfect, but no policy choice is. As I've joked on Twitter, where honestly I spend a lot of my time on the internet nowadays, we don't write the law in stone anymore, and that's a good thing. I see no reason to treat this suite of legislative changes as if it cannot be further refined and improved as we go forward. In fact, perhaps we can review the Competition Act every 5 years, as we do the Banking Act. We could keep it fresh, flexible, and responsive. And while I'm not entirely sure if this is relevant, I also wanted to note that in last year's federal election, it was actually the Conservative platform that spoke most explicitly to competition reform. It acknowledged that we need to ensure a level playing field for Canadian businesses. It promised harsher penalties for executives and companies that fix prices or abuse their dominant positions. The platform also supported workers, noting that mergers that reduce competition and lead to layoffs and higher prices will be rejected. Those were compelling proposals that I was excited to read. To conclude, I'd like to thank everyone responsible for drafting the language that we've read in the Budget Implementation Act and for supporting these important initial improvements to the Competition Act. I'm looking forward to continuing to engage on these issues and to further discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bednar. And now we'll hear from the Canadian Dental Association for 5 minutes of remarks, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bon matin à tous les membres du comité. I am a dentist here in Toronto, and I am president of the Canadian Dental Association. My name is Lynn Tompkins. I'm joined today with my colleague, our interim executive director at the Canadian Dental Association, Dr. Aaron Burry. And I am speaking to you from Toronto on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss Budget 2022 and its proposed investment of $5.3 million towards access to dental care. I would also like to thank Mr. Chambers, Mr. McDonald, and Mr. Blakey for meeting with the Canadian Dental Association on this topic over the past few weeks. At the Canadian Dental Association, at CDA, we know that oral health is an essential component of overall health, and we believe that Canadians have a right to good oral health. And that is why we fully support efforts by all levels of government to improve Canadians' oral health care and to increase their access to dental care. We applaud this historic federal financial commitment. Poor oral health strains other parts of the healthcare system, whether through hospital visits for dental emergencies or managing the long-term impacts of poor oral health on systemic health, for instance, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. And while Canada compares favorably to many other countries, too many people still do not receive the dental care they need. More than 6 million Canadians each year avoid visiting the dentist because of the cost. And this is especially true for low-income families. Today, I would like to comment briefly on how the federal government can best ensure this funding will quickly and efficiently benefit those Canadians who need it the most, namely by collaborating with provinces and territories to stabilize and to enhance the existing provincial and territorial dental programs. Yes, many of these programs have flaws. Some only cover limited services, and others only target a narrow segment of the population. For example, only children or only low-income families. Many reimburse dentists at rates below the cost, far below the cost of providing the treatment. However, this only underscores why it is vital for the federal government to work with its provincial and territorial partners to stabilize their programs and to use their existing infrastructure to deliver enhanced federally funded coverage. It makes no sense to construct a new standalone federal dental care program on top of strained provincial foundations. A one-size-fits-all, Ottawa knows best approach has many drawbacks. And difficulties in setting up a new federal program could actually jeopardize the dental care access for millions of Canadians who already have some sort of employer-sponsored coverage. 68% of Canadian households earn less than the proposed $90,000 threshold. So we risk defunding or the elimination by the provinces and territories of their existing programs. This would divert hundreds of millions of public dollars away from dental care and towards other priorities. At a time when the federal government has difficulty providing passports to Canadians, and this is a function we've undertaken for over a century, it is fair to ask whether it could quickly and successfully set up a program that directly provides health care to the general public, an area where it has little relevant expertise. The specter of a lengthy federal procurement process and the contracting out of the delivery of billions of dollars in healthcare spending to a private, for-profit insurance company is also unsettling. Pursuing either of these routes would be a mistake. Furthermore, there are massive jurisdictional issues at play. Broad-based healthcare programs are the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces, and efforts by the federal government to sidestep the premiers could lead to squabbles and court challenges. This would impede, rather than improve access to care for the very Canadians such a program would be designed to help. There have also been questions about whether the federal government has the constitutional or legislative authority to deliver such an initiative directly. Premiers such as John Horgan and Francois Legault have already called for these funds to be transferred to their governments to support provincial delivery of dental care. Liberal governments in Newfoundland and Labrador and Yukon, as well as the Progressive Conservatives in PEI, have also recently made huge strides on access to dental care. In this environment, the federal government cannot and should not go it alone. In late March, Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos outlined 3 principles for intergovernmental collaboration on healthcare: sharing responsibility, respecting jurisdiction, and focusing on results. Since then, we have appreciated the hard work done by him, by his team, his officials on this file, as well as how much they have consulted with the CDA and other stakeholders. Dr. Burry and I had an excellent meeting with him just a few weeks ago. I encourage the Minister to continue this collaborative approach by working on this file with provincial and territorial colleagues in the weeks and months ahead. Likewise, the day after the budget, CDA was happy to hear both Prime Minister Trudeau and
Ms.
Deputy
Tompkins, if you could start wrapping it up.
Yes, I've got
we're well over
four
time.
sentences.
Thank you.
I should have talked faster. I apologize to the committee. Recently, the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister said that they look forward to intergovernmental collaboration on dental care, as had recently taken place with childcare. We have a historic opportunity to make a big difference in the oral health of millions of Canadians. Let's get this right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present today, and Dr. Burry and I will be happy to answer any questions. And my apologies for going over time.
Not a problem. Thank you, Ms. Tompkins. And now we'll move to and hear from the Canadian manufacturers and exporters, and Mr. Poirier for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of Canada's 90,000 manufacturers and exporters and our association's 2,500 direct members to discuss Bill C-19. The manufacturing industry is 10% of Canada's GDP, produces 2/3 of Canada's value-added exports, and employs 1.7 million people in high-paying jobs across the country. In the lead up to the budget, CME issued its 2% challenge. That is, the federal government should attract 2% of OECD manufacturing investment into Canada, up from our current 1%, by instituting a national industrial strategy. Doubling that investment to 2% would revolutionize Canadian manufacturing, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and increase our GDP and standard of living. But to get there, we must address our most pressing challenges: labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, and declining investment and export performance. While there's a sprinkling of help in all those areas in Budget 2022, we believe more must be done to help Canadian manufacturing grow, and I will outline that plan now. Firstly, on labor shortages. Manufacturers, big and small, are struggling to fill the 81,000 vacancies across Canada. All this is happening even though our sector is one of the highest paying industries in the country. But we encourage the government to dedicate more resources to the problem. We must also speed up the introduction of a trusted employer stream to the temporary foreign worker program and reduce the administrative burden on companies applying to the program. Ultimately, however, the temporary foreign worker program is merely a pressure release valve. We need to aggressively increase our immigration intake targets to 500,000 per year in the economic stream alone. We need workers. Secondly, supply chain bottlenecks. According to a CME survey, 9 out of 10 Canadian manufacturers report encountering supply chain issues. The added challenge for Canadian manufacturers is their lower position in the pecking order for critical components. We currently have the situation in Canada where a company can have an increase in customer orders, a workforce ready to go, but nothing to build because they're waiting on parts. The National Corridor Fund to facilitate the movement of goods and other initiatives announced in the budget will help. But in addition to long-term investments in modernizing our trade infrastructure, we must address this short-term problem by providing temporary financial assistance to manufacturing companies still feeling supply chain disruptions. And lastly, on investment in exports. Canada lags behind other OECD countries in non-residential business investment, and this is leading to deterioration in our international competitiveness. On the net zero transition, Canada's manufacturing industry has already started, but smaller companies are falling behind. And on trade, while we enjoy some of the best free market access of any country on earth, our goods exports are stuck in neutral. To respond to all these challenges, the budget announced some measures that CME has long called for. The Canada Growth Fund and tax changes for SMEs are positive, as are the promises to look into adopting a patent box regime and shred reform. And a tax credit for investments in clean technology and a refundable tax credit for carbon capture will support manufacturers as they work to decarbonize their industrial processes. While these are all positive developments, we worry that the money allocated to these measures may not be sufficient. So we urge the government to put up the money necessary to make these changes have a real impact. We also need to better incorporate SMEs into the design of these programs so that they A, can qualify for them, and B, be helped through the process of using them, particularly on the net zero transition and growing exports front. Before I conclude, I want to register our concern with the proposed luxury tax on planes, boats, and autos. I echo all the others who have spoken out against this tax. We understand the allure of such policies, but they are a siren song as they do a lot of damage to domestic manufacturing. Manufacturers and organized labor are united in their calls for this tax to go, and we urge the government to do just that. In conclusion, while CME is pleased to see many policies we have long championed be included in the budget, this is just the starting point. We look forward to working with you all to tackle our industry's challenges and ensure our economic prosperity for years to come. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Poirier. And now we'll hear from Sarah Engel for the National Marine Manufacturers Association of Canada. Ms. Engel.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sarah Engel, and I'm president of the National Marine Manufacturers Association of Canada. I'm here to express the recreational boating industry's concerns with the proposed luxury tax on boats valued above $250,000. The boating industry has a GDP impact of $5.6 billion, $10 billion in revenue, and employs more than 75,000 Canadians in the core of the industry. Our industry has faced many headwinds since the start of the pandemic. Supply chain disruptions, production delays, and inflation have affected our members. Tourism and recreational businesses were closed for months due to the pandemic restrictions and border closures. On top of that, we are now facing an impending luxury tax on boats. Our industry understands the government's need to raise revenue in the wake of the pandemic. The luxury tax is not the way to achieve this. The history of luxury taxes shows that consumers will simply choose to take their discretionary spending elsewhere. That is what dealers and manufacturers are hearing from customers. The result will inevitably be a dip in revenue and hundreds of even thousands of job losses across the country. According to an economic impact study by economist Dr. Jack Mintz in partnership with Ernst & Young, the proposed tax would result in a minimum 90 million decrease in revenues for boat dealers and potential job losses of at least 900 full-time equivalent employees. In short, the tax will hurt the very middle-class families that the government is trying to help. The problem with this kind of tax, is that it can easily be avoided by consumers, either buying other goods or purchasing and keeping their boats abroad. For example, like Florida or Seattle, bringing the boat into Vancouver for the day, but keeping it stateside. The expected drop in sales will significantly impact the bottom line of manufacturers and dealers, who will then be forced to scale back their operations and staffing levels. While we saw a boom in boat sales during the pandemic, the supply chain disruption has been very difficult for our industry. And in fact, dealers are expecting a significant drop in sales due to material shortages. Ontario dealer Crates Lake Country Boats in Orillia expects a drop of 70% in sales by the end of 2022. And that doesn't account of what will happen once the luxury tax is in place. The tax also threatens the survival of Canada's domestic boat manufacturing base, which has already been hollowed out by years of competition with low-cost jurisdictions and offshoring for many. For some yacht builders, such as Neptunus Yachts in St. Catharines, Canadian sales have been the foundation of their business for 30 years. Neptunus Yachts expects to see these Canadian sales drop to virtually zero. We can also expect a ripple effect of job losses at marinas and service shops. Fewer new boats sold means less work for the marina service industry, much of which is concentrated in rural and coastal communities. In the early 1990s, the U.S. introduced a similar tax on boats that devastated the industry and was eventually repealed following the loss of thousands of jobs and a net revenue loss for the government. New Zealand, Italy, Norway, Turkey, and Spain have also previously introduced the luxury tax on boats. In each one of these cases, the tax was ultimately repealed due to the net negative economic effects. There is no reason to think the same will not happen here in Canada. We are also troubled by the singling out of recreational boats and not other recreational products. Boating is a cherished pastime for millions of middle-class Canadian families. In this unaffordable recreational property market, many families choose to purchase a boat valued above $250,000 as their cottage. At a time when governments are trying to attract investment and rebuild our economy, a tax that guts homegrown manufacturing and retail businesses makes no sense. Instead of supporting our industry as a vital part of Canada's recovery, this tax is picking winners and losers in outdoor recreation. The luxury tax also has the potential to damage Canada's trade relations. Concerns have been raised by the boating industry in the United States that this tax directly attacks our Canada-US-Mexico agreement. Similarly, our trading partnership with the UK and the European Union could be hurt by what many see as an indirect tariff on boats. Finally, I saw this morning that the PBO has released a new report on the tax and projects a $2.9 billion loss in sales, and that 75% of that loss will come from boats. This is what our industry has been trying to communicate to the government, that this tax will destroy the industry and have job losses across the country. Thank you very much for the time to speak to you today.
Thank you, Ms. Angel. And now we'll hear from the Philanthropic Foundations Canada, Jean-Marc Mangin, for up to 5 minutes, please.
beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, ainsi que les membres du comité.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the involuntary and serious consequences of this bill. Like many others in the sector, Philanthropic Foundations Canada supported the spirit in which we wanted to adopt, the government wanted to adopt S216. The objective of this bill is to provide an equal playing field in order to better support organizations that want to advance the greater good, even if they are not official charities. But the bill doesn't do that. In fact, if it is adopted in its current format, it will only make the operational environment worse. It will complexify it and add risks by legal measures that are too prescriptive.
Unintended consequences. These have already been submitted to the clerks of this committee. Together, we continue to offer our cooperation to fix Bill C-19. Given the vast and complex set of urgent challenges facing our communities, our collective focus must be to encourage adaptive, learning-oriented results management, not to impose in law 7 narrow and mandatory measures on all forms of partnerships. The former, that is S216, offers real accountability to funders and communities alike that works across a myriad of partnerships. The latter, that is C-19 in its current form, is a straitjacket that will hinder social innovation, continue the damaging colonial practice of direction and control, and ultimately restrict the flow of charitable dollars to those who need them the most. Let's focus on outcomes.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président. On me dit que...
Point of order. We haven't had any interpretation for a little while, and I think it's an issue with the quality of the sound. The interpretation is not coming through.
Point of order, interpretation, clerk, if you can share with us what's happening.
Oui, Monsieur Mangin, je pense que votre...
Mr. Mangin, I think that your mic is not selected. There is a mute and an unmute button with an arrow pointing towards the top at the bottom of your screen. Can you click on that? And under select microphone, can you tell me what is selected? Just a moment. Unmute? Yes, on the unmute button, there is a arrow. The microphone is selected. Do you have other choices? I have a different option as well. Your headset is not detected. Is it possible to take your headset out and reconnect it? Now I can't hear anything. It should take a moment to update and restart.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez, Monsieur Mangin?
Do you hear me, Mr. Mangin? Yes. Did a new option appear under select a microphone? No, it's the same option. Okay, so the system is not recognizing your microphone.
Because this is not a House recognized device on his head. We were told that he would appear in virtual yesterday, so we didn't have time to send out a headset. Monsieur Mangin, est-ce que vous avez un autre...
Mr. Mangin, do you have another headset at home? Yes, it has worked in the past. The iPhone system, there is an integrated microphone, and sometimes when you put it nearer to your mouth, it works for the interpreters. And does this work? No, it's the system that would taking in your voice, and it's not good enough quality for the interpreters.
So,
For Mr. Mangin, I did pause the time. You were at about 2.5 minutes into your opening remarks. What we can do as well, is that your new headset or your other headset?
That's my other headset. So
okay, can we clerk to see if that works?
Sure.
Does this make any difference?
No, it doesn't make any difference. Non, c'est ça. C'est parce que there's no microphone attached to the headset. It's only a headset. We need the sound to be better, so we need a proper microphone.
Okay, so it may not be possible to have Mr. Mangin because of our interpretation services.
Mr. Mangin, do you not have an iPhone device with earbuds?
I have the iPad.
Yes.
I can try that.
Yes, that might work actually.
Okay, as Mr. Mangin is trying that out, members, what I say is we move to our next witness, and then we'll bring Mr. Mangin back if he's got everything in order for his device. So we're moving to the Producteur de Cidre de Québec for up to 5 minutes, please, for opening remarks.
Hello, and thank you for having us today and for allowing us to present our position on this bill. My name is Marc-Antoine Lanier. I'm the president of the Association of Cider Producers of Quebec. I'm also the owner of the Milton Cider Mill in Quebec in the Eastern Townships. Catherine Saint-Georges is here with me today. Hi, everyone. I am the director for Quebec. This is an association that was founded in 1992 that is celebrating its 30th year today. We represent producers in all over Quebec, 81 members, and we have a mission and also a vision, which is to promote the collective interests of the cider associations in Quebec. There are 118 beneficiaries that produce cider in Quebec. The volume of cider went from 3.2 million in 2016 to 5.1 million in 2021. So that is a huge growth of 60% in 5 years. So cider is really doing well right now. And in that production, 11% of all of the apples that are cultivated or harvested in Quebec that are used for cider. So that really does contribute to the growth of the industry. The sales account for $51 million in Quebec annually. There are 9,000 jobs in cider and tens of thousands if we include transportation, agrotourism, restaurants, anything that is connected to cider production. Thank you, Catherine. What drew our attention today is the excise tax and the return of the excise tax. In 2006, there was an exemption to the excise tax on wine products that were produced in Canada. And of course, cider is part of the wine category in the excise, with regards to excise tax. There was of course, in July 2022, there will be a return of this excise tax. And it's been 16 years that we haven't had this tax in our industry. Many owners right now don't even know that this tax has existed in the past or that it can come back. The tax is equivalent to about our margins, actually, to our net margins with regards to our products. There's a program that is being drawn up. That compensation problem is something we'd like to draw your attention to, because if this program is not generous enough, then obviously some businesses will have to close over the next few years, and we do expect that. And of course, if they do close down, then that will, of course, affect peripheral industries like bars, restaurants, apple producers, and so on. We have very few options to diversify in our industry. We have a very restrictive rules and regulations. We are really attached to the apple, of course, and it's a vertical model. Here's what might be affected. In my industry, that would mean $200,000 in taxes, and my annual profit is lower than $200,000 a year. So that means that we will have losses with this program. There has already been a mention to the committee by Cider Canada and we support them. We want the program to support the entire cider industry and to prolong until 2030 and delay the application of the excise tax in order for it to come up at the same time as the program implementation. Thank you.
Merci, thank you. And now we will hear from the Wine Growers Canada, and Mr. Piskowski, I believe, is in the committee room.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all members of the committee for the invitation to discuss Budget 2022. Wine Growers Canada represents the national and international interests of the Canadian grape wine industry that consists of over 700 grape wineries, 1,800 independent grape growers, producing 75 million liters of grape wine in 6 provinces. We support over 37,000 high-paying jobs and contribute more than $9 billion annually to the national economy. As a result, every dollar spent on Canadian wine sold in Canada generates over $3.50 in gross domestic product. For over 16 years, I've been meeting with parliamentarians and government officials to talk about the tremendous growth and job creation opportunities from Canada's wine industry, driven by investments in capacity, quality research, innovation, and experiential tourism infrastructure. A major challenge is that wine is subject to excise duty, and other agricultural products are not. So I'm not here today to deliver a positive message. Today, like the cider industry that you just heard from, I'm here to tell you that Canada's wine industry is at a crossroads. In addition to the challenges of post-pandemic recovery, skyrocketing inflation on the cost of goods, and supply chain disruptions, the long-standing excise duty exemption that fueled investment in industry expansion will be repealed on July 1st. As you may know, 16 years ago, the 2006 budget established the federal excise duty exemption on 100% Canadian wine to incentivize strategic investments to modernize, grow, and enhance the quality of wines produced in this country. As a result, 400 new wineries were constructed, increasing the quality and quantity of Canadian-produced wines while increasing annual production of 100% Canadian wine by 45 million liters. This growth helped generate an additional $4.8 billion in annual national economic impact in return for $42 million in foregone excise revenue, a fantastic return on investment. Between 2006 and 2017, the excise exemption on 100% Canadian wine was not a major concern for import producers as they watched their sales grow across Canada. However, this all changed when the 2017 federal budget legislated annual alcohol excise duty increases indexed to the Consumer Price Index. Legislated inflation indexation, better known as the excise escalator, raised the ire of major wine-producing nations around the world, prompted a WTO challenge from Australia, and led to the pending repeal of the excise exemption through a negotiated settlement to end the trade dispute. Effective July 1st, all 100% Canadian wine, including non-packaged wine produced prior to this date, will become subject to excise duty. Canadian wineries agreed to the terms of the negotiated settlement with the Government of Australia based on advice from Global Affairs Canada and the Liberal government's promise made by then Finance Minister Morneau to ensure the long-term success of grape growers and winemakers. However, Budget 2021 announced funding for a limited 18-month support program, which we immediately confirmed was insufficient to address the loss of the excise exemption and the remaining 100% Canadian wine inventory that was produced excise-free. Clearly, this was an error in the budget. Between Budget 2021 and most recently Budget 2022, Wine Growers Canada repeatedly stressed that the only way to grow the industry was to increase the $101 million funding announced in the budget, extend the program beyond 18 months to encourage investment and bank financing, and zero-rate the excise duty payable on all wine inventories produced before July 1st, 2022, all of which were produced in a legislated, excise-exempt environment. While Budget 2022 did not respond favorably to Wine Growers Canada's request, the budget reported $390 million in forecasted federal excise revenue over the next 5 years, resulting from the repeal of the excise exemption. $135 million of that for year 1 and 2, $34 million more than was provided in Budget 2021. Excise duty on Canadian wine is not a consumer tax. It's a production tax because we cannot pass it on to the consumers. This is because imported wines represent over 70% of Canada's domestic wine sales market, forcing Canadian wines to be price takers in our home market. Investor confidence has waned as successive trade agreement concessions benefited imports and has stalled since the 2020 negotiated settlement with Australia. The excise exemption will be repealed in 4 weeks, and wineries, grape growers, employers, investors, and creditors remain uncertain of the industry's ongoing viability or the results of the wine support program, which has not been announced yet. Without an adequately funded wine support program, the lost revenue will have dire economic impacts on the entire supply chain. Wine Growers Canada's research estimates the loss of the excise exemption will result in a 12% drop of total industry sales, the closure of over 300 wineries, 2,400 job losses, and the loss of $425 million in economic impact. That's only for grape wine. That does not include cider, mead, or sake. The addition of 52 cents per bottle will negatively impact the industry. And what we are simply asking the government to do is to fix the error in Budget 2021-22, live up to your promise to provide adequate support for our industry when we need it most. If this isn't undertaken, the only winners will be the Australian wine industry and all other wines imported into Canada at the expense of Canadian wine sales in our domestic market. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Paskowski. And just before we go to the members' questions, want to see an update, Clerk, on how Mr. Mangin's audio is working. Is his headset being? My understanding is it's not being. We're not picking it up on the computer is, and we're not getting the headset.
From what I understand, the computer he's using does not pick up the mic that is attached to his microphone. And he did buy his headset yesterday specifically for this committee, so it's unfortunate that it's not working. We've called Mr. Mangin. Je pense, Monsieur Mangin, vous avez parlé avec.
I believe, Mr. Mangin, you've spoken with our technicians. Indeed.
Sir, at this time, I don't know how to proceed.
Okay, so because the headsets and our interpreters, and we understand the challenges it has been, but Mr. Mangin, I don't think members that will be able to proceed with Mr. Mangin due to the technical difficulties that we're having with the headsets and then with interpretation. So we apologize on behalf of the committee for that. I know that you did make efforts, Mr. Mangin, to be able to address us, the members, and have your questions. Looking to the members, I say that if you can submit maybe your remarks and to the committee, that would be appreciative.
I will do so.
Merci.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we are moving to questions, and in our first round of questions, members will have up to 6 minutes. So each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions of our witnesses. We are commencing with the Conservatives and have MP Chambers up for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses. What a vast and rich panel we have here today. Unfortunately, we won't have time to, or I won't have time to get to absolutely all of the questions that I'd like to. But I think listening to all of your opening interventions, the government seems like it's going to attempt to tax the country's way to prosperity, whether that's with the wine industry, whether that's on manufacturing. I think that's a lesson that we should be all taking away from this. I'd like to start with a few questions with Ms. Angel from the National Marine Manufacturers Association. Ms. Angel, you referenced potential job losses for your members, but across the industry. When this tax was proposed by the government, what kinds of consultation was there with your industry about the potential impacts? Did you feel that you were consulted?
We worked very closely with officials at Finance Canada and had a lot of dialogue, but there was no direct consultation with our industry from the minister's office or
right.
others.
So would it surprise you to learn that there was no economic impact assessment done at either the political or the government level? The only economic impact analysis that we have is one that we see from your industry association, and then also what we was just released this morning from the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. Does it surprise you that there wasn't anything done on the government side?
It would have been very much appreciated had there been some more thought put into it. I realize these things go how they go. So yes, it was surprising that there wasn't anything done, and that's why our industry stepped up in an effort to assist the government and worked with Dr. Mintz to have that study, so we would have some data to provide them to help guide them through the situation.
Right, and you also mentioned you listed a few other countries that actually have implemented a similar version of the tax, but have since, walked away from that. Do you know why these countries have done that?
Because in every case, once the tax was implemented, it didn't take very long before they saw job losses, the industry decreasing, and people even using their boats. In the case of Italy, again, it was lost revenue to the government and people taking their vessels outside of the country. And of course, most importantly, our neighbors to the south of us, the US, pretty much we saw boat manufacturing facilities from 1,200 jobs go down to 70. So it was quickly seen that it was a flawed approach.
Wow. And if you're in a border community, like many Canadians are, in fact, many Canadians live within a short distance of a border, or if you're lucky enough to live in a community like mine, you can get to the United States by water quite easily. How easy would it be to keep a vessel just across the border and either bring it into Canada or just leave it in the US for recreation?
Extremely easy, as you've pointed out, whether it's through the Great Lakes or in Vancouver to Seattle or on the East Coast and everything in between. That's what we're hearing. These vessels will register and be sold in the United States. They will potentially come up to Canada, but potentially not, because maybe there's too much, effort to do so. And so we'll lose the ripple effect of tourism dollars spending, and we'll just see a complete loss in revenue and those vessels not being sold or having an economic impact in Canada.
And so when we talk about lost sales, how does that kind of filter through? That's usually, so lost sales means potential cutbacks at a manufacturing facility, potential knock-on effects at a dealer, as an example, in sales. What other kinds of impacts can we expect? Is that about kind of how this will work?
No, that's the start of it at the manufacturer level, what's left of it in Canada, which we should be protecting and nurturing. Then the dealer that is selling the US made boat or the European boat, whatever the case, he'll see sales drop because people will choose to spend their discretionary money elsewhere. And then it will continue to ripple effect to the marina and the repair shop because now there's less vessels in the country to service and take care of. And every vessel is a micro economy of itself, and that continued layer of things that happen to stimulate the economy.
Thank you very, very much for being here today. In my remaining minute, I'd like just to bring in the Manufacturers and Exporters Association, if I may, Mr. Chair. Mr. Poirier, you've heard some of this discussion here. You also represent manufacturers in aircraft and in automobiles. How do you think that this tax is going to impact manufacturing? Are we going to have more manufacturing activity or less after this tax comes into effect?
It's certainly not good. And to echo everything that Ms. Angel said, it's for those same reasons, right? She's looking at the marine sector, which we have members of ours there, but it'll impact aerospace and it'll impact automotive and all the supply chain partners that are part of that. So these are little companies that make all those parts that feed into those products. It's a bad idea, just full stop. And history has shown that they do not bring in the revenue that they always hope, which is why I referred to it as a siren song.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I know we want to keep on time, so I'll go back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, MP Chambers. And just before we go to the Liberals for their 6 minutes, and MP Baker, members with Mr. Mangin and the Philanthropic Foundations Canada, members, you may have questions for Mr. Mangin and the organization. Please, if you could just submit those in writing, and we will get them to Mr. Mangin for answers, and then distributed to members with translation, as well as opening remarks from Mr. Mangin will be translated and sent out to members. Now to the Liberals and MP Baker for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much to all of our witnesses for being here today. I'd like to start my questions with Ms. Tompkins. Ms. Tompkins, in your opening remarks, you talked about the need for the federal government to work with provinces and territories in the implementation of dental care. You had some strong views as to how that could or should or shouldn't be done. What are your thoughts? I wonder what your thoughts are. Like when I think about analogs to this, I think about childcare, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the manner in which childcare agreements were reached recently, and do you support that type of model for the implementation of national dental care?
Thank you very much. Certainly, we do strongly recommend that the federal government implement this program through funding the existing provincial and territorial programs, which by and large operate well. They do reach the underserved populations, but for them it's a matter of funding. The federal contribution has been almost non-existent to the provincial programs. So these programs are functioning well. They are delivering care to the populations that they are designed to reach, but they do need to be funded, and that has been a long-standing advocacy position for us, even before this announcement, that the federal government needed to do that. So certainly, in terms of, I don't know all the nitty-gritty details of what you did in working out the agreements with respect to childcare, but it seemed that those agreements brought people together on areas of agreement, respected jurisdictional differences, and still were able to get the funding to the programs that needed it the most. So insofar as that would work for us, I think that would be a good model.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, because if I think about the child care agreements, without getting into the nitty-gritty here, what was done there, in my view, was, the government came to agreement with the provinces as to how they would fund that programming in a collaborative way. We came to agreement, separately with each of the provinces and territories, and ensured that was funded equitably across the country, but ensured that that provinces were on board. So I know those were some. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I did hear that you wanted to make sure some of those goals were achieved in in any kind of national dental care plan in your opening remarks. And so that's kind of why I asked you about the childcare. So I appreciate that.
MP Baker, if you could just raise your boom on your mic.
Pardon me.
Just be
sorry.
By your nose and your mouth there. Yeah. And
How's
I
that?
apologize for the interruption. Is that better, Clerk? Yes? Okay. That looks to work. Great.
Okay,
thanks.
great.
Yes. May I add a comment?
Sure,
because
absolutely.
I think the whole aspect of collaboration is extremely important, because I think, we in dentistry view this as a very exciting opportunity. But you've got children in pain, you've got disabled people who cannot smile, and you've got seniors that can't eat. So I think if we keep that overall goal in mind, that what we want to see is the funding go into delivering care for those who need it the most. I think if we operate in the spirit of collaboration and keep the bigger picture in mind, that we will achieve a great outcome. It's a game changer for us.
Great. No, I appreciate that, Ms. Tompkins. I have a follow-up question for you. I used to be a member of provincial parliament in Ontario, and so I'm familiar with the provincial side of this and now the federal side. And one of the things that people used to come to me on, approach me on, meet with me on my constituency office in Etobicoke Centre was they would raise concerns about the lack of dental care that's available for those vulnerable folks that you just spoke about. And so could you just talk about, and I think sometimes we've thought about dental care as sort of hived off from the broader healthcare system or healthcare needs of Canadians. And I'm wondering if you could speak to like the other health impacts that of poor dental health, like what that impact is, and what kind of strain it puts on the rest of the healthcare system when that poor oral health or dental health exists.
Certainly. I think a very good example would be a person who is unable to access dental care for an immediate problem, such as a toothache. So they have an infected tooth that either needs to have a root canal treatment or it needs to be taken out. And if they're not able to get to a dentist and receive the care that they need, what happens is that they end up in the emergency ward of the local hospital. And in that appointment, they're assessed, they're seen, but the definitive treatment is not rendered. There are very few hospitals that have dental departments in them. So that person is given a prescription for an antibiotic, sort of on spec, whether or not they really actually need it, but they're given that just in case. So then we have the potential overuse of antibiotics, which has a whole lot of other implications for health. And they're given a prescription for usually a very strong painkiller like an opioid. But the root of the problem has actually not been addressed. So that visit to the health system cost the provincial health system anywhere from $500 to $700, and still they did not get that treatment that would have taken care of the problem, which in a dental office would probably have been less than half of that cost. So that would be a very direct example of an emergency situation. I'm on staff at the University of Toronto Faculty of Dentistry. I teach in emergency and oral diagnosis. So we see people with an awful lot of chronic conditions, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, and the inflammatory effects of gum disease, what we call periodontal disease, which is actually a disease of bone, have significant effects on the inflammatory processes in the human body. So there are lots of implications. Whatever happens in the mouth either is a sign of something happening in the body or is a result of something happening in the body or the treatment of it. Pardon me.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Tompkins. MP Baker. Now we will have 6 minutes for questions from the bloc, and Monsieur Garon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions will be directed to Mr. Lanier and Madame Saint-Georges, Mrs. Saint-Georges, and I'll let you decide who will answer. In my writing, we have some fantastic organizations, Cidre Lacroix, Intermiel, some companies that process the products. And like you, they were also very surprised to see this tax after an industry conflict that was really about the wine industry. After what happened in Australia. What do you think explains the fact that we want to make this bill go so wide and include your industry? Well, we think that it's linked to the Canadian rules and regulations on wine. So it's more of a federal thing. cider federally is considered wine, just like mead and maple or berry drinks. So federally, they would say that an apple is a raisin. Your answer actually shows that this rule and this regulation is out of date. Of course, what your companies do is that they create jobs. Do you understand the impact of this new tax? I can't say anything about a government study, but we did create Cidra Canada recently following the announcement of this tax. And what we want to study is, or what we've seen is that we would lose potentially 4,000 jobs on 9,000 jobs with maybe 500 million across Canada. One of the explanations as to why we would apply this law everywhere is that Canada doesn't really understand what's going on in the rest of the country. Do you think that it's a mistake that's made actually in good faith, which is just a lack of expertise and could actually be corrected? I just want to make sure that I understood correctly. Do you think that we should modify C-19 in order to only apply it to wine? Well, if it could be done for cider, then that would be very beneficial, especially for mead and berry-based beverages as well. This is a pretty big tax. We're talking about 16 cents per can. There's the inflation question, and you wouldn't want, nor would you be able to offset those taxes onto and send to consumers. Of course, some producers have told me that this could actually encourage them eventually to use less local apples just so that they can survive, and so they would bring concentrate from other countries. Do you think that this is a problem that could indeed emerge after the implementation of this tax on production? Yes, of course, but we would see it more with regards with other provinces and not so much in Quebec, because rules in Quebec don't allow us to import apples from abroad. So our hands are tied. But in the rest of Canada, we will see an increase in imports of fruits and juice concentrate, either from China or the United States. And as far as you know, cider and mead are not part of a commercial conflict, are they? No, not at all. We are not targeted. In some provinces, there have been negotiations with the WTO. Cider was targeted during certain negotiations with provinces. We have 1 minute, 20 seconds left, and we are looking at C-19. We can amend it. You did say at the very end of your allocution, you made 3 requests. I would like you to reiterate them in front of the members. What we're asking for is a budget so that the compensation program supports the entire cider industry. We would also like to see the compensation program to be extended into 2030, and also a delay in the application of that excise tax so that it is coordinated with that previous program that I mentioned, because we think that it might end in 2030, and in 2022 or July 2022 is when we will have to take on this tax. So I'm not you're not in the wine industry, so it's a bit of a shock to you, and so you have to you need some time to adapt to this new tax. Is that also what the members of the association are telling you? I'm very happy to be here today, but even though we are informing our producers and we send them numbers, I can sense that the producers are not all that aware, and it's going to be very difficult in the industry. Thank you very much, Mr. Lanier. Thank you, MP Garon.
Pearson, you have 6 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for sharing their testimony today. It's been very informative and very interesting, and it's my very first time attending this committee, so I look forward to participating. I'm gonna follow up on some of the testimony, the very brief testimony that we heard from Mr. Mangan, and hopefully talk a little bit about some of the issues around S216 and the BIA. And the reason I want to do that is because we didn't get the opportunity to hear from Mr. Mangan, but this is an issue that's very, very important to me. I know it's very important to many members of Parliament, but I come with it from a bit of a special perspective, I guess, and that is that I have been working on changing the direction and control legislation in this country since 2005. So we have known that this is a paternalistic, a colonial piece of work within CRA that needs to be changed for a very, very long time. It has impacted the ability of the charitable sector to actually do the work that they are mandated to do. It is in no way reflective of participatory, democratic good practice in charity. So it needed to be changed. So when Senator Almavar came to me and to many other parliamentarians to speak about the changes to direction and control with her bill, S216, of course, we were all delighted. We were all on board. We were all working with her. The sector has worked very closely with her. Legal experts have worked very closely with her and her team to develop a really strong piece of legislation. So, of course, when we saw in the BIA that it was named and that the spirit of 216 was going to be implemented, I think many of us within the House of Commons and many more within the charitable sector were delighted. So of course, when we saw what was actually being proposed, the delight turned a little bit to disappointment. So I'm going to read from a few different places where I'd like to put some of this testimony into the record. And then I'm going to pose some questions to Mr. Mangan that he can respond to in writing bilingually when he's able to do so. So first of all, I want to start with a letter that was written to the government by Cooperation Canada. So for those that don't know, Cooperation Canada is an organization that represents many of the charitable sector groups that work in Canada. A very long-standing organization. It's been in place for I believe over 50 years. Very well respected and knowledgeable on this file, and has certainly taken the lead on it. And in the letter that they addressed to the government, they say that the BIA reinforces the colonial and paternalistic approach to the relationship between charities and the partner organizations supporting their charitable purposes. It makes the current regime more challenging for organizations to fulfill their charitable purpose by embedding a rigid and prescriptive approach to funding non-qualified donees inside and outside Canada in legislation. It makes the system more confusing, risky, and challenging for registered charities and non-qualified donees to work together, and as such, impedes philanthropic and charitable resources flowing to communities that need them the most. So the serious concerns that the sector has with the BIA that we would like to see changed within the BIA are the proposed definition of a qualifying disbursement, the proposed language relating to directed gifts, and the prescribed conditions for qualifying disbursements to grantee organizations. So I know that this committee has got information, has received information from Imagine Canada. I wanted to make sure that information from Cooperation Canada was also included. And I want to give a little bit of insight into what this looks like on the ground. So if you're, for example, looking at a situation where perhaps Indigenous partnership, perhaps there is a requirement to work with Indigenous groups that do not, for whatever reason, have charitable status. What we have in the BIA impedes the ability for charities to support Indigenous groups that are doing the work within their communities. That's something that no Canadians, I think, want as we deal with truth and reconciliation in this country. But there's another example too, you know, when we look at working internationally. So right now we have an incredible crisis that is happening in Ukraine. And I think it's really important that everyone on this committee recognizes that if we don't get this BIA right, if we don't get direction and control right, those organizations that can do the best work in Ukraine, that can do the best work with refugees that have fled Ukraine in Romania and Poland, in other countries, won't be able to work with Canadian charities because of the direction and control aspect that we have in this BIA. So as Mr. Magnan was I suspect going to tell us, we need to amend the language to direct giving. This would allow Canadian charities to contribute to pooled funds, supporting non-qualified donees. We need to remove the reference to disbursement meeting prescribed conditions and replace it with a requirement that the charity instead takes reasonable steps to ensure that the resources are dispersed and are used exclusively in furtherance of a charitable purpose. And we need to delete proposed regulation 3703 in its entirety. This would allow for regulations to remain in the CRA guidance documents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP McPherson. Members, witnesses, we're moving into our second round of questions. In this round, we will have the Conservatives up first. MP Baldinelli for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first of all, thank you to all the witnesses for joining us this morning. And given the significant interest of Canada's wine industry in my riding of Niagara Falls, particularly in the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, I'm going to be spending most of my time questioning Wine Growers of Canada and Mr. Paskowski. Mr. Paskowski, you had, in your testimony, had talked about, you know, how the sector had flourished since 2006 and the excise exemption that the previous Conservative government had brought in, and since that time, how the sector has grown. Near the end of your commentary, unfortunately, you were getting to the end, but I'm hoping you can get onto the record your comments on how you think this new excise tax that's going to apply as of July 1st is going to be impacting the sector and how it's at risk.
All right, thank you very much. As I mentioned, there's been significant growth as a result of the excise exemption that was put into place. You have to understand that the excise duty takes place right after the producer price on a bottle of wine. So as that moves through the price chain, ending up all the way down to the liquor retailer, it's picking up a lot of different ad valorem taxes at the liquor retail level, GST, PST, etc. So the 52 cent per bottle tax, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, will more than double. So in the case of the LCBO, that 52 cents per bottle may increase the price of a bottle of wine by roughly about $1.15. When you only own 30% of your market, if we pass that tax on, but the imports don't, we're going to lose that consumer to imported wine. So it's a significant tax that hurts every single wine producer in Canada. In terms of the wine support program, we still don't have the final details of that. But the way that we worked with trade lawyers and experts from agriculture, finance, global affairs was to develop a trade legal program that allowed all wine that was produced in Canada from fresh fruit, not concentrate. Imported concentrate had to be from fresh fruit, applied to both domestic and imported fresh fruit, would benefit through a grant program based upon the liters of wine produced in Canada. By putting a program in place like that, you would allow the producers to get funding from the federal government to be able to address the required investments that they need to make, as they have over the past 16 years under the excise exemption, which grew the industry significantly. That was a program that would work 100% for every wine, cider, mead, sake producer in this country, and every apple producer and grape grower would be significant beneficiaries as a result.
Quickly, you had mentioned about the last year's budget and the $101 million that was allocated for a program. And now we're looking at a budget which indicates about $135 million coming in. Has the government indicated to the stakeholder groups that that extra $34 million in revenue will be flowing back to the grape and wine sector? They promised to make the industry whole. And what are they telling you on that?
Well, we have 4 weeks left until we lose the exemption. So I do know that in my discussions with officials is that they are taking a look at the funding element. Given that $101 million is clearly insufficient to cover off all of the wine produced in Canada. The budget 2001 allocated $35 million in year one. That wouldn't be enough to cover off the grape wine industry, let anybody else. So our understanding is that the dollar component is being taken a look at clearly as a result of the projections and excise revenue collected as a result of the loss of the excise exemption, but we still don't have any definite answers.
Mr. Paskowski, one quick question. I believe there's only 36 days from now when that new tax is going to come into effect, and we still don't know details of this program. So, how does a sector prepare for a tax, that's coming in 36 days? I mean, several other organizations, such as the cideries and the craft breweries, have asked for a reprieve on the implementation date, extending it, for example, for 6 months. Do you agree with those assertions?
We have obligations underneath the Canada-Australia negotiated settlement. But there is a new government in Australia right now, and if there was the opportunity to get an extension to the end of this year, to the beginning of next year, given the fact that we don't know what the funding elements are right now, we don't know what the details of the wine support program are. Will they follow what we put together with senior officials? We have elements with the Canada Revenue Agency in terms of moving packaged wine products into retail sectors that have not been addressed yet. We've got a problem in terms of on July 1st, it's all wine that's packaged before will remain excise exempt. But in this pandemic, we have not only have bottle prices more than doubled, but supply chain problems. We can't get our hands on bottles. So even if we want to bottle wine to take advantage of the exemption up until midnight on June 29th, which is the deadline, we can't get enough bottles to bottle. So that becomes a problem for every single winery in this country. So if there was the opportunity to extend, yes, that would be a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Paskowski.
Thank you.
And thank you, MP Baldinelli. We're moving to the Liberals. MP Chattel for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Et merci beaucoup à tous les...
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. And thank you for your excellent presentations this morning. My question is for Mr. Poirier from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. I was very happy to hear you speak about the program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I would like to hear you speak about the small and medium enterprises and how the new program will help them to carve out their own place in the new green and digital economy of tomorrow.
Very pleased to see the creation of those programs. And, we're still awaiting a lot of the details of how they'll be structured and what they'll look like. But at first glance, it's something that we've called for. So certainly very happy on that front. As I said in my remarks, we sort of caution the development of these programs on two fronts. One is that there's adequate money in the program to incent the transition, but particularly for SMEs who struggle, one, knowing about government programs to begin with, but then two, navigating them and using them to full benefit. Really thinking about in the structuring of the program, how do we hold them by the hand, take them through, just so that the pickup is there and that the results are there as well. So as I mentioned, what we're seeing right now is the big companies, the big manufacturers have already begun net zero transition with specific government help in many instances. But we're not seeing that same thing happen with the SMEs. They're not even thinking about it in many cases, depending. So that's a problem we want to tackle and that we're alerted to, because most of our companies are SMEs. So we're going to get massive reductions in greenhouse gases by tackling the big ones, but most of our companies are SMEs, so we need to bring them along for the ride too. So sort of a long-winded way to get at the question, but again, it's that SME component that's very important for us to get that right.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Poirier. Equally, this is what I'm seeing. I'm in a rural riding. We have a lot of SMEs, and I'm worried that they are not thinking strategically in how they will be the winners in tomorrow's economy. And I see larger company really making these strategic decisions. The world is moving towards this green and more technologic economy. And so what would be your advice in setting this funds of innovation, this fund of le nouveau Fonds de croissance du Canada?
The new Canada Growth Fund.
Advice for the committee. And look, if you have more, we'll be very happy to read it and you could forward it, and especially targeting SMEs.
Yeah, we've done a lot of work over the past few years on this, so I would be more than happy to share that research and those policy recommendations with the committee. So perhaps we can connect offline after. But at a high level, what I mentioned before is the SME piece. That's important. The big companies are going to do it, but they'll also drag up all the companies that are in their supply chains already along those lines. So it's an awareness function for the SMEs to say, hey, look, this is the future, and we need to help transition that. So I think one of the best ways of doing that, one of the problems government has is that they have excellent programs, but it's not well known, or it's not a default reflex for an SME to see, gee, I wonder what the government's doing. So I think it's leveraging trade associations like us, like CME, but like my colleagues here on the panel today, to really help deliver the message. And there's a bit of capacity building within that too. So if we're going to use exports, for example, right, some of the agencies like the Trade Commissioner Service and EDC will embed employees and resources within the trade associations to try and access those SMEs better, right? So it's that type of model that will really be needed, well, at least for our sector.
Merci, Monsieur Poirier, MP.
Thank you, Mr. Poirier.
I do see, we're moving to the block, and I do see MP Sainte-Marie, and for 2.5 minutes, MP Sainte-Marie.
Oui. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Lanier and Mrs. Saint-Georges. So Australia is now going after Canada for the production of wine grapes, and there's this tax that is affecting you because Ottawa is not making the distinction between cider and wine. So before penalizing you like this, Ottawa did no studies, but you have done an impact study. So we have about 2 minutes left. Can you give us more information? 4,000 jobs. How many producers is that? Where are they? Are they in rural zones? Are they in the city? The floor is yours. This is a preliminary evaluation, of course. The association is very recent. We've only been around for 1 year. But the geographically, the businesses are very concentrated in British Columbia, in Ontario, and in Quebec. They're definitely in rural areas. in Quebec, it's most of the province, really. The basis is the fact that it's not profitable. The return of this tax will mean that there will be very low profitability for these companies. The industry is very young. It is flourishing as well. Cider is growing in Canada, and we have a very good reputation. Our products are world-renowned. Canadian products are world-renowned. And so what I see is that we're taking a huge risk to not support our industry. Thank you. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? Yes, my hats off to you for this industry that is growing. We have quality products, and a few weeks ago there was a cider theme in Joliette, and I discovered that there was a great cidery in Saint-Jean-de-Matha, and there are fantastic products. So I think it's really wild that the government wants to penalize an industry that is so wonderful. Thank you.
And now we'll move to the NDP for 2.5 minutes. MP McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to all of our witnesses today. I have some questions for Ms. Tompkins, if I could. Of course, as a New Democrat, we were delighted to see that my colleague from the previous Parliament, Mr. Harris, dental care plan is going to be going forward, and that we'll be working on that together. And one of the reasons I'm so pleased with that is that, of course, we know the impacts of failure to have dental care for children around this country, and that it is in fact the leading cause of children visiting emergency rooms. I'm just wondering if she could elaborate more on the impacts on children when dental care is not available.
Certainly. There are many, as you've alluded to. The treatment of children for early childhood cavities, or caries as we call it, can take up a lot of time in operating rooms in hospitals. That's one thing, because very small children, if you have an age, and I see one on our call here, and I hope she's brushed her teeth today. Kids as soon as they have teeth can get cavities, and children who are susceptible have a higher rate of decay. Sometimes end up at the age of 2 or 3 in the operating rooms of hospitals having fillings done, including the baby tooth version of root canals in their molar teeth. So that's a tremendous event for a small child to go through, very traumatic, and for the parents, and also at high cost to the health system. So the other thing, it's one of the most common causes of children to lose time from school. And they can't eat properly if they have toothaches, and infections can make them very sick. So, our goal would be to have every child seen as soon as possible in a dental office within 6 months of the eruption of the first tooth, to identify children that are higher risk for dental decay, and certainly put preventive measures and education measures in place so that over a lifetime, a child will need less dental care. That is our aim, that children will need less dental care. So the earlier that we can identify those types of problems in children, the better. And unfortunately, there are higher rates of dental cavities and dental problems in new Canadian populations, where perhaps the emphasis on dental care has not been the same, or they've been brought late to the dental office. And so by the time they do get to the dental office, they've got a lot of dental problems. And another aspect of prevention for children is the community water fluoridation. That still makes a tremendous difference in the rate of decay in children. And so that would be something we're fully supportive, is community water fluoridation to reduce the amount of dentistry overall, which in a lifetime will also reduce the environmental burden of a child's treatment in their lifetime.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Tompkins. MP McPherson. Now we'll have the Conservatives up for 5 minutes of questions. I have MP Stewart for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay? I was having some connectivity problems here, and rural New Brunswick. It's common. My questions today are for Mr. Pawlowski with the Wine Growers of Canada. Mr. Pawlowski, considering excise taxes negatively affect both consumer and wine producers, you think it would have been clear that government would need to find a better solution? Of course, that's my opinion, but do you agree that this excise tax has the potential to produce real income losses across wages, profits, and other returns to labor and capital in this industry?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it's a producer tax, and we can't pass that tax on to consumers, as I mentioned, or otherwise we'll lose the consumer to imports. So if I'm paying 52 cents a bottle in tax, that's 52 cents a bottle I can't put towards any other part of my business. One of my smaller board members is going to be paying $300,000 in tax effective July the 1st per year. That's his entire marketing budget for the year. So that's just one example of the impact this will have on the industry. As I mentioned, the majority of wineries in smaller regions, New Brunswick, for example, will not be able to survive a tax like this. It'll hit their already low margins in this business, and this will cripple them.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for the example as well. That adds some light to it. And my apologies on your name. It's Peskowski. I called you Pawlowski the first time, so I'm sorry about that. So taking into consideration the hit to the industry that it actually causes based on the examples you've just shared, we must also consider the consumers. So across the industry, what additional price increases can the consumer expect?
Well, at this point, it'll be the tax itself. You will have some wineries will attempt to pass it on. I'd say possibly some of the, super high premium wines will be able to pass it on. It has a larger impact, obviously, on lower priced wines than on higher priced wines. But you also have to remember that effective July the 1st, every 100% Canadian wine sold in Canada will also face indexation. So on April 1st of every year, we have legislated increases to the excise duty. Given where inflation is right now, we could anticipate, a 5 to 7% increase in the excise duty rate. There will come a point where we'll have to pass that on to the consumer, and that, like I said, will double by the time it hits the consumer. So there is a risk there if you do pass on that cost. The consumers who have a line in the sand, maybe it's $10 a bottle. You go to $10.05, they switch over to a different brand, and in most cases that'll be to an import. So that will impact the bottom line of every winery across the country and cidery.
Thank you, Mr. Peskowski. We've heard now that basically the wine producers and consumers are going to be hit with this excise tax in numerous and different ways. But to follow up on the obvious reduction in real income to wine producers, I'd like to also ask, would you say that the increased costs to producers associated with shipping because of the dramatic rise in fuel costs coupled with the excise tax will most certainly drive prices to a point that sales will be negatively affected?
Well, we're facing that impact right now. So, the supply chain disruptions have increased the cost of goods for wine producers in, above 10% rate. So that's impacting everybody's bottom line and everybody's level of profitability. So there is that point in time when you have to make a decision. Am I going to pass this on to the consumer? And how am I going to go about doing that? So, the loss of the excise exemption is but one issue amongst a whole range of issues that are facing the industry right now. It couldn't come at a worse time in the history of the Canadian wine industry, and it will have severe impacts above and beyond just when the tax comes into play, because there's a lot of other factors at play.
Mr. Peskowski, if sales are negatively affected, wouldn't producers then be required to potentially reduce employee levels to compensate for the losses?
Yeah, I guess if you take a look at if profitability is impacted, they're going to have to take a look at all mechanisms. Number one, the first casualties will be grape producers. The demand for grapes will have to decrease. Production will go down. So that's the first element of the supply chain that will be impacted. The second one will be employment, as I mentioned in my comments. If the excise exemption is lost, we're looking at least 2,400 jobs will be lost and 350 winery closures. Those are real numbers. That is the impact of an excise tax, which is already one of the highest in the winemaking world. The U.S. tax is 35 cents a liter. Ours is 70 cents a liter, but the U.S. provides a tax credit to their producers, which brings it down to 2 cents per liter. One of our biggest competitors is France. They don't pay any excise tax.
Mr. Pruskowski, thank you. And now, thank you, MP Stewart. Now moving to the Liberals and also from the East Coast, we have MP MacDonald for 5 minutes. MP MacDonald, you are on mute.
Oh, I'll start over. Thank you, Chair.
There you go.
Is that better? Yeah. I'm going to jump around a little bit and thank you to the witnesses here today. But I just wanted to go back to Mr. Poirier, and I know your organization was very vocal during the blockades, obviously, and the supply chain issues. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the vulnerability of our supply chains and how important they are to the economy. I know that I think you quoted that it was 10% of our GDP. It's the Canadian manufacturers and exporters. So I just, what do we need to do in the future to ensure that things like that never happen again? Because it is critical to our economic value in Canada.
I agree, it is. Just as an anecdote, whenever at the association level, whenever we hear from our members the worst, it's whenever we have blockades or transportation network disruptions, because I think it affects them the most. And certainly manufacturers are the biggest users of Canada's transportation network. So, we approach this from the angle that everyone has a right to protest, everyone has a right to do that. However, we have done the exercise of deeming certain things critical infrastructure, and we would argue that transportation networks are that, especially when our industry is held hostage every time they're shut down. So our solutions is just to designate those and make those out of bounds for protest activities. However we want to design that, that's a discussion we can have. But just from a fundamental perspective, that's how we view it. And, it would still leave 99% of the country open for legitimate protests. But just to ensure that those networks are protected on that front, because the reputational damage that Canada takes every time we have to close down our transportation network, whether that's for a strike, for a blockade, what have you, is significant. And our members tell us that they have to have really tough discussions with headquarters and other countries to justify why they're still making stuff in Canada and operating in Canada. We don't want to have our members have to do that. It's unnecessary, and it's a big threat to that 10% of GDP. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I know my colleague, I want to follow up on what Ms. Chattel was talking about. And just touch base with you on the small to medium enterprises. I come from the East Coast, a lot of smaller businesses. And the government put forth a $5 billion green bond. And I'm just wondering how your organization is willing or presenting that as an opportunity for small companies to possibly reduce their emissions and get involved in the innovative side for reshaping how they do business.
Yeah, that's part of it, right? I think what we're noticing from, at least from the government, is that we're starting to piece together our incentives and our plans, and there's various elements to that, right? That being one of them. Our general feeling is at this point is that they're all introductory sort of moves, first steps. Because when we look at it, there's been billions of dollars put on the table for this type of transition. but we look at it and we think it's probably around $100 billion for the entire industry. So that's why my comment sort of focused on, okay, this is great. We asked for this and we got it, but we need to make sure that the money's there to get that full transition happening. And it's not to say that the government has to fund all of it. It'll be a partnership with industry, certainly. But that's our initial assessment at this point, is that it's a good first step, but more is needed. And obviously to work with us during the process. So it's not a one-size-fits-all government program that's designed in Ottawa, and then there's no take-up from SMEs, for example.
That's good. I'm glad you said that, designed in Ottawa, because I'm on the East Coast, and we have quite different than some parts of the other parts of the country. We've heard a lot, Mr. Poirier, about, and we've seen a lot over the past number of years of protectionism. And, we talk a lot about diversifying our markets, and we are dependable on our biggest trading partner south of the border, and we've seen disruptions in global supply chains and so on and so forth. How do we plan for a future that eliminates some of these possible consequences, especially for your sector? When you hear Buy America or what have you, or when you see that China puts rules and regulations around, even most recently with COVID-19 and shutting, like, how do we overcome that? What's your sector's opinion on ensuring that we can continue trade, which is so important to the economy of our country?
Thank you. And I'm going to ask her a very short answer, Mr. Poirier.
Okay. Basically, there are mechanisms in our trade deals. So the competitiveness chapter in NAFTA, the new NAFTA, for example, that are designed to do exactly that. And we think that we should just embrace those and get working on those and leveraging those to their maximum extent. We haven't done that yet. So that would be my quick comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, MP McDonald. Members and witnesses, just looking at the time, we're coming to the top of the hour pretty soon, and that will be the end of our first panel. So what we're going to do is we'll divide up the time equally, as we usually do in this committee. So for this round, each party will have 4 minutes to ask questions. We'll begin with the Conservatives. Have MP Alpas up for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. I appreciate your expertise. I'm going to start with Dr. Lynn Tompkins. Thank you very much for appearing today on behalf of the Dental Association. I'd like just to talk a little bit about the ways forward on this. So in the last few elections, Conservatives have talked about the need to work with provinces and territories as a cooperative partner to fill in gaps effectively that may be in some systems, rather than a whole-scale change that might totally change for many the experience that many Canadians have of programs they already know and they trust. So in regards to dealing with some of the gaps that currently exist, can you identify where those would be and which provinces or territories you think would bear the most fruit to really ease the gaps that are there?
Thank you very much for that question. Certainly, that is our perspective, that in cooperation and collaboration with the provinces, if the federal money that has been set aside for dental care was distributed to the provinces to sustain their and really stabilize the existing programs. So really across the country, all of the programs are in need of some sort of support. There are better programs than others in certain areas, but there's no one perfect system. So I can't give you a single province that I think you should single out for special treatment. I think it's Canada. We need to treat everybody equitably. So, but yes, there are existing programs, there are existing administrations, there are existing relationships amongst the stakeholders within the provinces. So we don't really need another top-down administrative-heavy standalone program. What most of the programs need is funding. So that they can either increase the funding levels to cover the cost of providing treatment, because a lot of them don't even cover the cost of providing treatment. So any dentist or dental office that treats a patient on some of these provincial programs is actually subsidizing the programs out of pocket. and that's not sustainable. So I think that would be the way to go in terms of going with the existing programs. The people who are there, they can either expand the program to include more people according to the goal that the federal government has, like the 0 to 12 age group. But it would be much better to be done that way rather than a top-heavy, top-down new administrative program that might capture people that already have dental plans, right? The eligibility criteria may capture people that already have dental plans. And we're already hearing some hints that some employers might be saying to their dental plans, well, we'll drop the people that are going to be covered by the federal plan, so you're going to have this unintended consequence. So we do feel very strongly that the best way is to flow the money through the existing programs.
So in regards to a national universal program, I take your point about this government can't seem to issue passports on time, let alone the Phoenix payroll debacle. So I certainly take your point on that. But on the universality, who wins in that particular case? Is it people that are wealthy enough that they're able to provide for themselves through private plans? Is it the private insurers themselves? Ultimately, will taxpayers, even low-income taxpayers, be subsidizing people that are well off?
Well, we have a good system already in Canada. 2/3 of Canadians are covered by some sort of plan, whether it's through their employer-sponsored plan or through some government plan. And 75% of Canadians report that they feel that they have good access to care. So again, it gets back to our original position, is that we feel that flowing the money through to the provinces to build up, to stabilize, and to support the existing programs is actually going to be the most equitable, because the people that are at the top end of the income range that already have dental plans don't need to be on a federal plan, even though technically they might be eligible.
Thank you. And thank you, MP Albus. And we'll hear from the Liberals for about 4 minutes. MP Sorbara.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to be here today with all my honorable colleagues. I just looking at my screen, is Vas Bednar not on our screen anymore? Did she sign off? If I missed her, if I'm missing her.
Ms. Bednar had to leave at 11:40.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I just want to put on record that Mrs. Bednar's comments in terms of the changes with regards to the Competition Act, which Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Minister Champagne have championed in the budget and now in the BIA, I applaud with full vigor. They are long overdue and well needed, and it's great to see us tackling the issue and ensuring that there is competition and within the economy, within sectors, and that policies that are anti-competitive are being addressed, and that the Competition Bureau and Competition Act are being given more teeth and more resources to ensure that Canadians are put first in consumer choice. I do wish to speak to Mr. Poirier from the Canadian Manufacturers, I believe, on here. And if I see him on the screen, unless he's left as well. Matt, there you go. I've interacted with you folks for many years and had a lot of great meetings. The region the York region area where I live and represent, we are a manufacturing hub. We have the largest auto part supplier in the world, Magna, the third largest in Canada, Martin-Ria, which is about 1.5 kilometers away from my constituency office. We're an agro-food processing hub. We are, as you would say, a place to let a lot of folks invest and work, and we're logistics hubs. We have the largest CP intermodal facility, the busiest one in the country in my riding, and Vaughan has the largest CN yard in Canada here, and I know Peter loves to hear that. But I do want to ask, in terms of the issues that we need to address on the supply chain, we have a supply chain working council. We have put money in the funds. We have the National Trade Corridor Fund. We are making progress on supply chain. It is difficult. Can you provide any sort of recommendations that you think top of mind that will assist us in addressing the issue even further?
Yeah, all those initiatives that you mentioned, Ms. Sorbara, are needed and are good. In addition, we're noticing, because of the relative small size of Canadian manufacturers, we're struggling to get up on the pecking order for critical components, and we're still seeing those problems in our industry today. So that's why I mentioned emergency, temporary, bridging financial help we can discuss about how that looks, but as it comes to us is wage subsidy. Just so, because it's such a tight labor market, our members are really afraid of losing workers while they're waiting to be able to produce because they're waiting on critical parts. So there's that component there. But also it's the labor shortage that's driving this too.
And Matt, I do want to say that within the BIA, if I'm not mistaken, remember reading all 464 pages or thereabouts, there is something with regards to the Minister of Immigration, some legislation there that would allow the minister and to identify certain areas within the economy, whether you call them NOC codes as NOC codes, to allow faster access or more efficient access to those pools of labor. There is a shortage, but there's also what I would call a skills mismatch within the economy. In terms of providing the right skill sets to workers. Wouldn't you also agree on that front?
Absolutely. And that's why we call for industry councils that can help coordinate with government, with labor, with all the players involved to help coordinate those labor market needs, right? Because they're always changing and they'll be different by region as well.
Okay. And Peter, am I finished there?
That is your time, MP Sorbara. We know Vaughan and York Region have a lot. My kids always remind me Canada's Wonderland is up there. So thank you
always
for
welcome.
that. And now we are moving over to the block and MP Sainte-Marie for.
Monsieur Fonseca.
Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Question for Mr. Lanier. If the bill goes ahead as is, what is the impact it will have on the price of cider? Like I said in my introduction, there's a market that has been developing over the course of the last 16 years. One of the big markets is the market of cider in cans. And so Mrs. Saint-Georges might be able to show us those that are commercialized. It looks a lot like the beer, canned beer market. So the comparison is done a lot between the two. What we see is that our margins are a lot more restricted. First, we are producing a product based on fruits and not wheat or grains rather and water, and so it is more expensive for producers. So in many provinces, we have to produce our own fruits, which puts us under a lot of pressure. And then there's the question of taxes. Taxes are lower for beer. So our capacity to increase the prices based on the tax that is about to come up is going to be very difficult. And so the gentleman from the wine growers said when we talk about, introducing new products, it's going to be very problematic. With products that are very niche, maybe there is a bit more of a margin to be able to increase prices. But for producers in Canada, we are mostly producing new products that are the prices are not very high or anything. So we can't necessarily increase the prices. The producers have to stomach the tax. And so, of course, there will be some losses and potential bankruptcies. So cider is competing with beer, if we talk about cans, more so with beer than with wine. And you have production costs that are higher than beer, and your margins are lower, and you pay higher taxes than beer. And this is a new growing industry that is not mature yet. So this is horrible, and this needs to change. Exactly. If I may, the idea is not to reduce our prices by importing products from elsewhere. The idea is to keep a product that is good quality for the consumer. So the representative of Cider Canada had said that, which is that the temptation to import apple juice from the United States to reduce costs is there. But what we like in your industry is the fact that there are artisans, and so that tax must not be applied to you. There is an impact across the entire sector. Anything that's coming from the United States or apples or concentrate from the United States or China will be cheaper. Of course, it's a lot more expensive to grow apples in a Nordic country. So it's clear that your products must be exempt from the excise tax. Thank you.
Okay, merci. And merci, MP Sainte-Marie. Now we'll move to the NDP. This will be our last questions for this first panel, and I have MP McPherson for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one more question actually for Ms. Tompkins, and thank you very much for reminding all of the children that may be watching this finance committee to brush their teeth. My son got braces yesterday, and I can tell you this is going to be a couple of years of dire parenting on my end. The question that I have for you, Ms. Tompkins, if you wouldn't mind, could you talk a little bit about what the investments in the workforce, what the government should be looking for in terms of the investments into the workforce as we scale up access to dental care across Canada?
That's a great question, and that's something that we have been talking to some of your colleagues about, because across the country right now there is a shortage of dental assistants. And so even before COVID there was a shortage, and since COVID that has been exacerbated because the demands on a dental assistant, I mean a dental office operates like a small hospital for any of you that have been to your dentist, and especially since COVID, and you see all the barriers and the PPE and everything that's going on. Well, the people that actually make all of that happen are the dental assistants. They're highly trained, they're very technical. It is not an easy job, and it requires education. In most provinces, it's regulated. So we are actually applying to the federal government on a project in collaboration with the Canadian Dental Assistants Association, and looking for ways that we can increase the number of dental assistants that enter into the profession, but also at ways of retaining them in the profession, because the supports for mental health, for instance, just like all other frontline workers during the pandemic, they've been tremendously affected. So that is a bit of a concern if we get a sudden influx of new patients coming into the system. I mean, dentists and dental office staff will do our best to handle that influx, but there is a shortage of dental assistants. And so the other thing is the government looks at, I think there's another study going on looking at the care economy in the public health system, is that we're concerned that don't forget the healthcare that's being delivered in private settings, such as dental offices, because if you end up attracting more people into one aspect of the health system, we don't want that to be at the detriment of the private delivery. I mean, there are dental assistants who work in public health. Dr. Aaron Burry himself works in a public health office 1 day a week. But the majority do work in private dental offices, and the majority are female. So all the issues around childcare and schooling at home and all of that stuff that took place during the pandemic had a tremendous effect on the workforce.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting, and I think just those trickle outs of how this will all be impacted is really important for this committee to consider. I'll just end, if I could, Mr. Chair, with just one more reiteration that the sector, the experts in charitable direction and control have given amendments to this committee. They have written amendments. I would urge this committee to consider those 3 amendments that they have brought forward. And I would just ask that Mr. Magnan, when he has the opportunity to do so, provide some feedback to this committee on the impacts on the charitable sector if we do not get 216 or the BIA correct on with regards to direction and control. But I will cede my time at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP McPherson. Just to reiterate that Mr. Mangin will, members, if you want to send in questions, Mr. Mangin will provide answers and in both official languages back to the committee. So thank you for that. And we want to thank all the witnesses for providing us with your time, your expertise, coming before our committee, answering many questions. I know we had many of you here on our first panel, and we really appreciate, like I said, you coming before us. So on behalf of the committee, the clerk, the analysts, the interpreters, we thank you and wish you a great day. Thank you very much. Members, at this time, we're going to suspend for a couple of minutes as we transition to our second panel. We'd like to welcome today's witnesses for our second panel. With us from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, we have the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Monsieur Yves Giraud, and also accompanying Mr. Giraud, we have Jan. Is Jan with us? Yes, Jan, and the Director of Budgetary Analysis. So for opening remarks, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Hello, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. We are pleased to be here to discuss our analysis related to your study of Bill C-19, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7th, 2022, and other measures. With me today, I have Xiaoyi Yan, Director of Budgetary Analysis. Consistent with the Parliamentary Budget Officer's mandate to provide independent, nonpartisan analysis to Parliament, my office released our assessment of Budget 2022 on April 22nd. This report identifies several key issues to assist parliamentarians in their budgetary deliberations, as well as updated fiscal and economic projections.
In terms of transparency, Budget 2022 includes long-term economic and fiscal projections, which improve fiscal transparency and contribute to sustainability analysis. However, the analysis provided in the budget would be further enhanced by the inclusion of additional details, such as long-term projections of old age security, employment insurance, and children's benefits. It's also worth noting that while the budget includes some of the measures from the Liberal Party 2021 election platform, the implementation of any remaining platform measures and additional commitments not accounted for in the budget, such as pharmacare, will impact the budgetary balance going forward. Our report also notes that continued misalignment of financial reporting, as Budget 2022 was tabled a month after the government's main estimates. Parliamentarians could be well served by adopting a new legislative or administrative framework to enforce better alignment among the government's various financial reports. Following this assessment, on May 17, we published a stochastic debt sustainability analysis of the medium-term outlook presented in Budget 2022. The report provides a stress test of the government's financial position. Based on past experience, our results suggest that the government could maintain debt sustainability over the medium term. However, our results also suggest that, on balance, there is upside risk to the budget 2022 projection of gross debt as a share of GDP. In addition to our reports, my office has also released independent cost estimates of selected measures contained in Budget 2022, including the mobility tax deduction for tradespersons and indentured apprentices, and the luxury goods sales tax. We would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our analysis of Budget 2022 or other PBO work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Giroux. We will move right to our first round of questions, and we have the Conservatives up first. MP Chambers for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Giroux, and I see you have one of your staff with you today. Thank you very much for appearing at our committee. It's wonderful to have you here. I think back to the times prior, before we had the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and I think that the work that you and your office do certainly makes our job as parliamentarians easier, but increases our confidence level in some of our financial discussions that we have at this table. So thank you very much. You mentioned you did some work on the luxury tax. I'd like to spend a bit of time there, but before I do, Mr. Chair, just to provide notice to this committee of a motion. I do not wish to debate this motion, but I did want to table it here publicly. I have sent it to the clerk. But following on the good work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, that this committee, in respect of the luxury tax, will ask the Department of Finance to table a report to this committee on or before September 19th, which would include an economic impact study of the select luxury tax items, including a breakdown on the expected employment and expected tax revenue. On or before October 24th, that the Department of Finance provide a detailed written progress report on the efforts by the department to address some of the issues that we've heard. And then by November 21st, 2022, that the department reappear before this committee so we can discuss its findings. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll just...
Thank you, MP Chambers. I'll just ask that the clerk has received it and distribute it to members. Thank you. Yeah, thumbs up.
Thank you very much. So we'll discuss that at a later date with my peers. Mr. Giroux, thank you for providing some economic basis. We have not seen a economic impact assessment done by the government for this luxury tax. So I was very, very interested in what you shared with us. At a high level, I saw some significant lost sales, about $2.9 billion. A lion's share of that was affecting the vessels. The boating industry is about 75%, $2.1 billion. I know there's assumptions that go into that, but just want to talk about a high level about what we could expect to see, even just the direction of economic activity.
So as you pointed out, we did estimate the impact on sales of the introduction of a luxury sales tax for automobiles, vessels, and aircraft. And we find that the bigger impact will be on vessels. So with the reduction in sales for vessels, we can expect a reduction in activity, especially with respect to sales, but also potentially manufacturing of these vessels and aircraft to a lesser extent, and automobiles. However, we haven't done an economic study because that would be a significant undertaking for a small office like ours. So it's not clear whether there would be a full substitution for exports for the loss of sales, whether it's mostly imports or domestically produced goods that would be suffering. Probably a mix, but we have not done that study. But it's clear that with a reduction in sales, there would inevitably be a reduction in sales tax that would otherwise be collected. One can think about the GST, but also provincial sales tax and the HST. So in a nutshell and at a high level, that's what we can expect, a reduction in sales of almost $2.9 billion over a 5-year horizon and a commensurate reduction in sales tax collected.
Thank you very much. I would support, obviously, your office getting additional resources so it can take on additional studies like this. But my math, kind of high level math, shows just if you looked at sales taxes, so federal, provincial together, about $375 million, holding everything else equal, on $2.9 billion of sales. So that, just at the highest level, if you net that out against what the government says it will take in revenue, is going to take down substantially the net impact to the government's coffers. Is that a fair assessment?
That's indeed a fair assessment. Because of the reduction in sales, there will undoubtedly be a reduction in sales taxes collected. The extent to which is difficult to estimate because it's a niche market. Obviously, not every one of us buys a vessel or an aircraft. I certainly don't, and I'm not in the market for such an expensive car, but it's certain that there would be a reduction in sales taxes receipts. The extent to which this will happen is an estimate, and because it's a niche market, it's not straightforward to estimate what we call an elasticity. So the extent to which sales will respond to an increase in prices through the luxury sales tax. That being said, we have looked at international experience and we have used a peer-reviewed elasticity that we think is very defensible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I hear that some homework is better than no homework, and I think that this shows the government should be doing that. Just quickly, you mentioned that this is the second time you came to the committee, and you mentioned about the timing of the budget and having MPs be able to review things. Do you just want to expand on that very briefly about what you would like to see in terms of timing of reports and the tabling of budgets?
So that's a good point. Ideally, there would be a budget that would happen earlier in the cycle, for example, in February, so that budget items would be reflected in the main estimates, which is the vehicle through which the government finances its operations, so that you as parliamentarians, when you review the main estimates, you can make the connection back to budget items, as opposed to having main estimates that are not complete, do not paint a complete picture of the government finances and do not include budget estimates. So you'd have a much easier job, I would say, of approving or scrutinizing government expenditures or the government's requests for money that would include budget items, which is currently not the case with a budget tabled way after the main estimates have to be prepared and tabled.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux. You're welcome to come back anytime. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, MP Chambers. And as far as the motion, the clerk did receive it, although we do need it in both official languages for distribution. So thank you, and we'll now hear from the Liberals for 6 minutes. MP Chattel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Giroux, for being among us. It's always a pleasure to have you here. In your stochastic debt analysis in 2022, you wrote that most of the trajectories would be translated by a decrease in the ratio after 5 years, and the government would reach its goal. Can you develop on the process that you used to reach this analysis? Yes, so it's not an easy question to answer because the analysis is quite technical. The analysis is based, for econometricians who are listening, it is based on the Monte Carlo program. We use parameters that have been used in the last 30 years, so from 1990-91 to the period right before the pandemic, and we consider the variables, the various economic variables, such as interest rates, and how they behaved over the course of this long period. Then we introduce it into a model that starts now. So the future trajectory of debt depends on the macroeconomic parameters. If they vary in the same way that they did in the last decade, then that gives you a variety of possible scenarios. And that's how we can estimate certain probabilities. It's not really probabilities, but it's a scope of possibilities, really. And the government can then reach its targets or not. And so we have to look at what happened in the past decades. We put that into a program or a model with current parameters, and then we look at the past and we see what the future might hold. But of course, it doesn't take into account any extraordinary events like a pandemic or a war. But it gives a very good idea of the future trajectory of debt by taking into account what happened in the last decades. Did you take the war or what we know of the war into consideration? We did, as in that we took into account the fact that there is a slightly increased inflation, but we don't explicitly take into account the impact of the war in Ukraine. For example, if the war continues or if it has even bigger impact on Canadian or world economies. So you have taken into account what we know up to now on the trajectory. Yes, implicitly that is taken into consideration. It takes into consideration the parameters as they were known at the end of the fiscal year. So one of the most important points for Canada to be able to prosper economically is the ratio of the net debt on the GDP. So what I understand is that we are on a good track. There's a positive outcome potentially. Yes, according to the simulations we made, there is a 2/3 chance that the ratio would be lower, that the gross ratio would be lower. So it is possible that it will be lower in 5 years than it was in March. Of course, it depends on many factors. The future will tell us, but we consider that the probabilities are pretty good, even though we are not 100% sure, but 2 out of 3 is a pretty good ratio. So this is even better for the net debt when we remove the pensions or the pact of pensions that we capitalize, that Europe does not capitalize, for example, its retirement funds or its debts for retirees. So it will be an even better outcome for the future. Yes, the net debt should actually be lower than what we foresee, but it is what we see is that when we do international comparatives, we look at gross debt, but the results should be more or less more in line when we look at whether it's gross or net debt. The levels are different, but the trajectory should be more or less the same. So if there is the probability of having a gross debt that is lower in 5 years, so the probability should be more or less the same if we consider net debt. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you, MP Chatel.
To the block and MP Samari for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Fonseca. Thank you, Mr. Giroux and Mrs. Yan. I would like to thank you for all of the work that you do. It's all very useful, and we do use it. We're getting an objective point of view on what is on the budget, and it's very important for us to be able to do our work properly. My questions will have to do with your evaluation of the tax on luxury products. The note that was updated this morning But first, I'd like to remind that when we talk about public debt in Canada, it's important to look at the provincial debts. Every year, you do update the financial viability report, and long term, the effects are on the provinces. In the committee, we asked the finance minister the following. Before going ahead with the luxury tax, if they had actually done an impact study on the industries that would be affected, and they did not do it, which I think that really shows that this is a major something that is very much lacking. Of course, you look at the impact for the federal government, but you don't look at the industries and what the impact is on them. Indeed, we look at the costs that are generated by the tax by taking into consideration that there is a decrease in sales if we increase the price. Of course, there are people who will avoid buying things and will maybe buy things in foreign countries, for example, with boats. And so, of course, we look at the federal income or revenue with boats and aircrafts, for example. Thank you, and I appreciate the transparency in your notes. You talk about the sources of uncertainty with regards to what can happen when the tax is law. With regards to elasticity, have you used the same elasticity for every sector, automobile, aircrafts, and maritime? Yes, because there's very little data for elasticity on these kinds of goods. These are goods that are very unpopular. There are not really any studies in markets that are similar to that of Canada. So with regards to elasticity, it is based on an American study that was done in the last decades and years that estimates elasticity at 2.4. And I think it's based on luxury cars. So I'm trying to see, or 2.4% rather. So we don't have any elasticity distinctively for boats, cars, and planes. But we did take this one on luxury cars. And so the point is to understand the limits of this study or of this law, because there has been very little done with regards to studies. For aircrafts, it's a very important sector economically in Canada and in Quebec, and there's a lot of fear. Would Bell Helicopters be impacted by this luxury tax? The company was wondering if helicopters were taken into consideration by your researchers in the evaluation of this measure. I do believe so. However, we have to check with Bell Helicopter, the manufacturer, what proportion of their sales are for individuals. I imagine that it's very low because the market of helicopters is not a very popular one. I do have to check with the analyst, but I do think that helicopters were included. Even if they weren't, helicopters would represent a very small proportion of the sales with regard in the aircraft industry. Thank you very much. The industry is quite concerned with regards to the business aircrafts. They are not necessarily targeted by the luxury tax, but in these 160 pages of the new tax, they are actually included. There's the question of charter planes. When a business buys a plane and doesn't use it, and they allow a charter flight company to use it for personal use, then the producer of the plane might be actually impacted by the tax, even if they sold it to a business, because the charter company might actually be renting it to individuals, and then you might see that 20% tax come in. So because of all of that uncertainty, many clients are now canceling their orders with the manufacturers who make business planes, aircrafts. Most of the production is exported, but the company is receiving the tax, and it could be 6 to 9 months before they actually get a reimbursement. And so there's a treasury flow issue. All these elements that I've mentioned are not directly measured in your notes, but will they be in the Minister of Finance's report? We did take into consideration that there are some provisions that exempt purchases for business purposes, but if there is uncertainty because of the legislative measures, then it is possible that there will be delays in purchases until things are clearer. Thank you, MP Saint-Marie.
Pearson for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would also like to echo my colleagues in thanking the witnesses for being here today and sharing their expertise and providing parliamentarians with the tools that we need to do our job and to continue to play an important role as opposition members. So thank you very much. My first question that I have for Mr. Giroux, I noticed, or I understand, that there was a costing note on the mobility tax deduction for tradespersons and indentured apprentices. And I'm just wondering if you'd be able to walk the committee through the estimated costs and what data went into your projections.
So we looked at thank you for the compliments, first of all, and it's a teamwork. So we looked at the data based on Statistics Canada and some tax deductions and the number of persons, apprentices, and indentured tradespersons who reported living at a certain distance from their place of work, their primary place of work. So we looked at that, and based on the number of these tradespersons and the estimated cost of traveling back and forth, we estimate that the tax deduction would amount to about, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but would be about $100 million per year in tax relief for individuals who would benefit from this tax provision. That is, those who travel more than, I think it's 80 kilometers to their place of work.
Thank you very much. That's obviously very important for many working folks in Alberta, where we have situations where people have to travel a great distance to get to their place of employment. My next question for you, in your budget 2022 analysis, you did note that the estimates in the budget once again had discrepancies. Would you be able to highlight some of the areas where you noticed discrepancies, as well as explain why you think a more aligned budget and main estimates process would be of benefit?
So Dr. Yan just tells me that in response to the previous question, the distance is 150 kilometers, so my apologies for that. With respect to your question on the budget and estimates alignment, it's fairly easy to see which items were not in the mains that could have been in the mains. So it's virtually all budget items that had expenditures or that have expenditures in the current fiscal year. Because the budget is not or was not tabled before the production of the main estimates by the Treasury Board Secretariat, these items could not be included in the main estimates. So there are multiple expenditures that were included in the budget that are not in the mains. The list is very long. It's probably a few hundred items. So the impact of that is that when you, as members of Parliament and your colleagues in the Senate, look at the main estimates, you don't have the numbers when you look at specific departments or specific initiatives or even the totals. You don't have the full picture of the government's plan when it comes to spending. You only have the state of the world as it was on March 1st. So anything that's in the budget will be reflected later in supplementary estimates A, B, or even C. So it makes your job slightly or significantly more complicated because you have to approve main estimates that are a very incomplete picture of the government's plans when it comes to spending. And that's why I'm saying, and I've been saying for a little while now, that it would be beneficial for transparency purposes, and it would facilitate your work as legislators if the budget items were included in the mains, and that would mean either tabling mains later or more easily done, I think, tabling the budget sooner so that officials in the Treasury Board Secretariat have sufficient time to incorporate these items in the main estimates.
Thank you. And you spoke of hundreds of examples. Is there any that are particularly noteworthy from your perspective that you could highlight, even just a couple?
Well, I could flip any page in the budget. So I have a budget here, so I can look at several of the items, and there are so many things in the budget that I cannot think of one in particular. But if you think of any departmental spending that's highlighted in the budget, it is probably any example is a good example, I think. So I would be remiss if I singled out one or two.
Thank you. As much as we try to get you to single out, I appreciate your honesty and integrity in not doing that. In your budget 2022 report, you mentioned increased spending on tax compliance, and I'm wondering if you could walk the committee through what measures you looked at and what your findings were with regards to that. We know CRA is quick to enforce tax compliance for low-income Canadians, but is less quick to enforce for large corporations. I'd love to hear your insight on how Budget 2022 chalks up in that regard.
So in response to your previous question, that's a very good example. Additional money for CRA, which was not in the mains, could have been had the budget been tabled earlier or the mains tabled a bit later. So when we looked at additional money for CRA for enforcement of tax provisions, we find that the expected returns that CRA expects or the government expects seem to be going down. And that's a bit surprising because the additional money that the government indicated would be recovered through previous exercises or previous investments or spending initiatives was slightly higher. So there's not a lot of detail. So that's a bit surprising in that it doesn't indicate to us why the government would be expecting lower returns with this series of additional spending for the CRA. However, what we have also noted in the budget is that there's no provision, in fact, or no explicit provision at least, for the subsequent activities after additional audit activities. For example, there's no significant amount that's identified. Maybe it's there, but it's implicit rather than explicit. So there's no additional amounts that will inevitably lead or for what will inevitably result in additional opposition and appeals to these additional audits. So it's one thing that we have flagged in addition to an absence of significant details as to the areas that will be the focus of these additional sums for CRA.
Thank you. And thank you, MP McPherson. Members, that concludes our first round. Moving into our second round, we have the Conservatives up and MP Stewart for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my first question is to obviously the PBO. It was a stunning negative revelation that was outlined in your update document, whereby it was stated that the new luxury tax will result in over $2.8 billion in lost sales over 5 years. If someone called it a torpedo tax before you asked the questions, then I think this might work. I've heard it called that a few times. I've heard other members call it a torpedo tax, and that is valid. I liken it to what this government has chosen to do is similar to a submarine targeting an unsuspecting merchant ship in the dead of night. This government is firing a massive torpedo at the Canadian car, boating, and aerospace manufacturing sectors, among others. Considering the struggle post-pandemic that all sectors are having, including manufacturing, are you of the opinion that this tax needs to be put on hold or done away with altogether?
Well, that's a question that I think is better answered by you collectively as parliamentarians. My job, I like it a lot, is to provide you with the facts, the numbers, and I leave that to people that have been elected that are much smarter than me collectively to make these decisions. So I provide you with the numbers, and you collectively decide whether it's worth pursuing, amending, or not. So I won't pronounce on that.
I appreciate that. I was certain you were going to bite on that, but I tried, right? You know, I know what your job is. You do it very well, by the way. Obviously, I think the luxury tax is really hurting, and I think it's the wrong thing to do altogether. But, you know, that's political, and I guess you can't do that either. But the second question I have, considering the 15% decline in sales projected in the PBO report on the luxury goods tax, does the PBO expect job losses as a result of the reduction in sales caused by the tax?
So normally we would expect, yes, some job losses. The extent of these job losses would be determined after a much more in-depth study of the market. And that, by that I mean whether there would be an impact, the greater impact would be on domestically produced vessels, cars, and aircraft, or whether there would be a bigger impact on imported goods. So not having a very firm grasp of the market and the split between domestic and foreign vessels, aircraft, cars, it's difficult to determine the extent of these job losses, but it is quite clear that with such a reduction in sales, there would certainly be job losses, but the extent of these job losses can only be determined after a much more in-depth study of the market.
Thank you for your answer. In view of potentially significant job losses as a result of the tax, would it be reasonable then to expect a reduction in federal and provincial income tax revenue due to jobs lost as a result of the tax?
It's clear that with the reduction in sales, there would be a reduction in sales taxes, provincial and federal. With the reduction in sales, as I mentioned, there would be a reduction or loss of jobs. But the subsequent reduction in personal and corporate income taxes resulting from these job losses would obviously depend on the magnitude of these jobs that would be lost as a result of the reduction in sales. And that would be something that could be assessed once a deeper economic assessment is done. As some of your colleagues have suggested that the Department of Finance could be doing, and I think they'd be in a good position after having performed that economic analysis, they'd be in a good position to determine that impact on government finances.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
Thank you. We've got about 30 seconds, and MP Stewart, I am trying to hold everybody to their time, so if,
sure.
If you're good there.
No, I've got one.
Okay,
last question.
Very quick and very short answer. Thank you.
Last question to the PBO. Any final comments on the luxury tax? Anything else you want to add on the tax itself?
I think, Mr. Stewart, you've asked all the right questions, and I did my best to provide you with answers.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, MP Stewart. Moving to the Liberals, we have MP Baker for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Giroux, for being here with us today. I'd like to go back to Canada's fiscal position. The budget that was introduced projects a declining deficit, getting down to, I believe it's $8.4 billion in fiscal year 26-27, And I think there's sort of a conscious effort, these numbers and certainly the decisions that are being made or proposed in the budget to achieve those numbers demonstrate the government's commitment to see debt to GDP, the ratio decline. And I think you spoke about that a little bit in your interactions with Ms. Chattel. So on April 28th, S&P Global Ratings reaffirmed Canada's AAA credit rating. And they noted, and I'll quote, S&P Global Ratings view that Canada's high wealth, economic diversification, and ample fiscal and monetary buffers are helping the country recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and leave it well positioned to face future potential shocks, close quote. So I guess my question to you, Mr. Giroux, is do you agree with this assessment by S&P?
It's true that Canada's fiscal situation is quite strong, especially compared with other G7 countries. So I have no reason to disagree with the overall Standard & Poor's assessment. That being said, Standard & Poor's is in a different business line than I am. They're in a business line of assessing credit risk for sovereign countries and subnational countries, whereas I'm a couple of levels down in trying to determine the fiscal sustainability long-term of governments, as well as the cost of certain specific measures. So, but there's no fundamental reason to greatly disagree with Standard & Poor's assessment.
Okay. And I guess you, in your response just now to me, you spoke about our fiscal position relative to other G7 countries. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I think you said something along the lines of that it's quite strong. First of all, could you correct me if that's wrong, or tell me if that's correct, but also then explain to me why you feel that way?
Well, when we look at the debt to GDP ratio of G7 countries, Canada is, if not the lowest, probably the second lowest, or certainly clearly among the lowest when it comes to debt to GDP among G7 countries. And with the fundamentals of the Canadian economy and what we know so far with respect to the longer-term trends, the country is still in a fiscally sustainable longer-term situation. And that includes at the federal level. So that's, in a nutshell, why we can say that the situation is good at the fiscally speaking. And one of your colleagues, Monsieur Sainte-Marie, talked about our fiscal sustainability report that we regularly publish, and where we look at the provincial situation as well as the federal situation. And we will be in a situation to release an updated fiscal sustainability report during the summer, so that members of the committee will have some pleasant summer reading, looking at an updated fiscal sustainability report that will look at the sustainability of the federal and provincial governments in the country.
Thank you very much for that, and I'm looking forward to spending my summer reading your work. I think I only have about 60 seconds left, so I'll be very brief. But the government announced sort of a strategic policy review. Do you support such a review? And what recommendations would you have for such a review of our spending?
So that's an interesting question. That's a policy decision on the part of the government to undertake a review with the view of reducing spending. I'm not in the habit of pronouncing on specific individual policy items as to whether they're good or not. I would point out, however, that as outlined in our budget report, or our note titled Issues for Parliamentarians, if the government sticks with the Budget 2022 plan, and that includes the strategic review, that would mean a very, very small growth in operating and capital expenditures from 2024 to 2027, which would be not seen in a long time. So that would represent a significant departure from the last 10 or 12 years.
Merci.
Okay. Thank you.
Monsieur Giroux, MP Baker, and now to the block, MP Samari for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I only have 2.5 questions, I'm going to ask my questions all at once. First is on the luxury tax. Just confirm if I understood correctly. The luxury tax would increase the revenues for Ottawa, but will decrease the revenues for provinces because the amount of sales will decrease. So the tax on at the provincial level will have a decrease in sales. And then for Bill C-19, I'm concerned and afraid that in the committee we won't be able to study this mammoth bill of more than 400 pages that has many sections. Do you or your team have any red flags to bring up in the bill if you had time to go through it? Most notably in Article 9 of Section 5, the part on imports. Article 15, or even the patents and copyrights. I'm surprised that there is, in Section 18, there is something about the lunar station, and then there is also about strip and search in prisons. Do you see that as relevant to the budget, or do you see this as overwhelming? There's also a law on immigration and so on. Are there any red flags? Thank you for your two questions. So the answer to the first question is indeed the luxury tax will increase federal income and revenue, but it will decrease, sadly, the provincial revenues, especially for the provinces that do impose a tax on those kinds of goods. With regards to red flags, we haven't actually studied in depth any of the provisions that don't incur any big expenses, but we did remark that in Part 5, Article 6 is the same as the Bill C-17, which means that the transfer of $2 billion to provinces to reduce the delay in the healthcare sector, they both have the same goal as far as I understand it. I believe that it's because the government hopes to adopt C-19 sooner than C-17, and I think that that's something that we need to pay attention to in order to make sure that there is no doubling up on the targets and on the expenses, because we are talking about $2 billion. Thank you. Thank you, MP Saint-Marie.
And we have MP Blakey is back with us. MP Blakey for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back. I wanted to follow up on questions about the CRA and particularly, expenditures in respect of recovery and the diminishing return that you outlined in your report. One of the things that I've been trying to get to the bottom of, I don't know if that's represented in some of the numbers in your report, or if this would be in addition to, but I'm wondering if you're in a position to be able to provide any comment on the investment the government is making, that including some money in this bill, to go after people who applied in good faith for CERB when they were told to, who don't have much income themselves, are already living below the poverty line, and that the government seems intent on pursuing for that money. And I'm wondering how good an investment you think it is to chase the poor for money that they don't have, and how likely government is to recoup that money. And if you're aware of any data, we've asked government directly. I would say we have not got an adequate answer on how many people they believe owe the government money under this program, how many people are below the poverty line, how much debt they think they're owed, how much they actually anticipate recovering. So if you're in a position to be able to provide any commentary on that as well, in terms of what data is available and how it might help us understand, return on investment, so to speak, although I don't think that's the appropriate term when we're talking about people who are already in financial distress.
So we don't have data on that specific aspect, CERB and its successors, and the potential amount that was paid by mistake or fraudulently. But I would think that CRA would have at least partial data quite easily, especially if they do some recoupment between what they paid and whether individuals who received CERB also had other types of benefits or were not eligible. For example, if they were in receipt of full-time employment or income from full-time jobs, or old age security guaranteed income supplement, for example. So it would be fairly easy for CRA to at least provide this committee with some partial data and the amounts that they anticipate or expect to have been paid in error or by mistake or to people who were abroad. So all these payments that should not have been made. So I'm a bit surprised to hear that CRA is not providing you with that information. So that's probably as much as I can say, not having received or asked any data on CERB paid fraudulently or by mistake. That's probably as much as I can say.
Thank you. And
thank you.
Thank you, MP Blakey. Now we're going to go to the Conservatives and MP Albus for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Parliamentary Budget Officer. I appreciate your presence, your team's work. Officer, did your office anticipate the COVID-19 pandemic?
The short answer is no.
Did your office anticipate the war in Ukraine?
Again, no.
And I don't blame you for that. I don't think the Department of Finance did either. But you've made a case here today that sometimes life comes at you fast, and we have to be prepared as a government and as a country for these unanticipated events. You've given some suggestions here on long-term sustainability for parliamentarians to have a better lens, old age security benefits, child benefits. How can the government report to Parliament better so that we at least can anticipate the expenses that we know we will have?
Well, that's first of all, I was worried when you asked me if I had anticipated that. I was worried you would blame me for that, but thankfully you didn't. In response to your question, it's not that difficult to provide these long-term expenditures, or at least an estimate of these long-term expenditures. We do that. We are a small office, so we provide, as part of our fiscal sustainability report, we incorporate longer-term trends and projections when it comes to old age security, child benefits, equalization payments, transfers to provinces. It's not super easy to do, but it's doable. In fact, it's a good practice recognized by the OECD and other international institutions that governments should provide that or do undertake that type of long-term projections to have an idea as to whether their policies are putting the country's finances on a sustainable or unsustainable medium and longer-term track. So we do that on an annual basis. There's no reason why the Department of Finance and the government could not do the same.
So I do hope government members are texting Mona Fortier at the Treasury Board right now asking for these changes. But I'd like to talk to you about your work in regards to the Department of Finance underestimating what you viewed as their debt servicing costs in the fiscal year 2027. I think you said it was by several $billion. Has that assessment changed since we've seen an uptick in interest rates?
Not to my knowledge. The department, at least to my knowledge, has not published an updated estimate of the debt servicing cost. And you're probably referring to our stochastic debt sustainability analysis, where we indicate that there's a significant higher risk a risk that the debt servicing costs will be higher than expected by the government due to the increase in debt and also the expected increase in interest rates.
So the government that brought us essentially doubled the spending on our debt. They've essentially doubled our debt load. They're not anticipating future events. They're not reporting to Parliament what they know is already caked into the books. As you said, they should be able to report on these things. And they still have yet to tell us what kind of deals they've cooked up with the NDP when it comes to pharmacare or dental care or all these other things that may happen. So do you believe that the government needs to be more upfront on all of these things?
Well, I certainly think that there is room for improving transparency, especially when it comes to medium-term and longer-term fiscal forecasts. As I mentioned on a couple of occasions, the budget that was tabled in April lays out a fiscal track, but that fiscal track does not include significant measures that were promised during the last electoral campaign, notably pharmacare, as well as additional funding for mental health. And there are also demands when it comes to increasing national defense spending to meet the NATO target of 2% of GDP. And there is tremendous pressure from provinces to significantly increase healthcare transfers. So all these pressures are there, and I think the government will probably have to either agree to some or deliver on some of these commitments, or be clear that some of these cannot be met.
Thank you. And thank you, MP Albus. And now we're going to the Liberals, MP McDonald. After MP McDonald, that would be actually conclude our second round. So MP McDonald for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Grue, and your team for what you do. It certainly helps being a parliamentarian and creating policy, hearing some of your advice. And, I want to add to my colleague there a little bit, but, when you look back prior to COVID-19, we were very fortunate. We had the economic stability, and inflation was exactly on target, and our unemployment numbers were extremely good. And I think we went into COVID-19 in really good shape, and I think the recovery of our economy is certainly showing the strength we had prior to that. But in your report, you talked a little bit about or requested for all governments at every level to expand their analysis to give a total Canada or Canadian perspective. Can you just kind of elaborate on what you mean by that?
What I mean by that, I assume you're referring to the fiscal sustainability aspect, and I refer to the fact that we should consider when we are looking at longer term or medium term fiscal sustainability, we should also consider other levels of government in our analysis of long-term fiscal sustainability. It's one thing, for example, to look at the fiscal situation of the federal government, but given it's the same taxpayer supporting his or her municipal, provincial, and federal government, we also need to take into consideration the finances at the provincial and municipal level, although we find in studying that issue that what matters the most for long-term fiscal sustainability is the federal and provincial fiscal sustainability. So that's what I mean when I suggest that we take a whole of Canada approach, especially in the context of fiscal sustainability.
Thank you. And there's been some reports here on Prince Edward Island just recently about many $1 million left on the table relevant to COVID recovery. So it was interesting to hear that and how you would decipher some of those challenges. But I know, our government expects to reduce spending by $9 billion over 4 years, beginning in 2023. So just comparably, how do we stand within, and I know you answered some of this, but like our economic situation right now coming out of the past 2.5 years, can you just elaborate a little more on our fiscal positioning and our economic value going forward? Are we on the right trajectory?
With an expected reduction in deficits from the very high levels of the pandemic, what we anticipate is a substantial reduction in the deficit going forward to about 0.3% of GDP in 2026, if I'm not mistaken. So that, if that materializes, would put the debt to GDP on a downward trajectory, which would be key in restoring the Canadian long-term sustainability, at least at the federal level. However, as I mentioned before, that doesn't take into account potential additional investments or spending items when it comes to platform commitments of the 2021 election campaign, or commitments or calls for Canada to increase its defense spending or healthcare transfers to provinces. But it doesn't mean that even if the government was to fulfill all these commitments and respond favorably to these pressures, it doesn't mean that it cannot reach its debt to GDP targets or achieve the reduced level of deficit. It would just mean that it would require additional revenues, increased taxes. So all that to say that we are on a relatively good track as a country when we look at the federal level for a reduction in the deficit and a reduction of the burden of the debt as a share of the economy. But that depends a lot on what will be done in the future to respond to pressures that the government is faced with.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you,
Okay.
merci, and thank you, MP MacDonald. And we want to thank the Parliamentary Budget Officer for appearing before our committee. Thank you for your insights, for your reports, for the work that you do, and answering so many of our questions on behalf of all the members of committee. Also, Dr. Yan, who's with you today. Monsieur Giraud, merci. And members, and this is on behalf, of course, of the clerk, the analysts, and everybody here at committee. We thank you for appearing before us. Members, on that, I just wanted to let members know Monday's meeting will be from 3:30 p.m. and it will start at 3:30 rather than 11 a.m. And on Tuesday, FINA's meeting from 11 to 1, and again from 3:30 to 5:30. Okay, so again, Monday we'll be meeting at 3:30, starting at 3:30 instead of 11, and Tuesday meeting from 11 to 1, and then again from 3:30 to 5:30, members. Okay, and on that, shall we adjourn? Thank you, members. Okay, have a great day.